Hello, and welcome to Mapping the College Audition. I'm your host, Charlie Murphy, director of MTCA. That's Musical Theater College Auditions. Check us out at mtca.com. And today we've got Colleen Kessler on the show. Colleen is an MTCA alumni parent, having just gone through this process with her daughter Molly, and also an author, podcaster, specializing in neurodiversity and gifted learners and homeschooling. So apart from her experience as a been there, done that parent in this process, we dive deep into all those individual topics, and we do manage to break the record for the length on this podcast, for those who haven't already looked at their podcast feeds and seen that ticker. An exciting achievement for us, for sure. These alumni parent episodes have become some of our most requested favorites, so I'm trying to listen to you all and keep them coming. Though, of course, also making sure I'm giving you a balance of our usual artist episodes and our rotation of college deep dives as well. As always, if you want to participate in leaving us feedback in general about the types of episodes you love, or just help the podcast out as we reach more families and try to increase our reach across the globe, you know you can leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you leave one on Apple Podcasts, we may just read it on the show, like these two reviews from CJ Reeves 12. You need to listen. If your kid is interested in a career in the performing arts, you need to listen to every episode. Charlie asks the questions I want answers to. So informative and a terrific resource as we embark on this journey. CJ, that's so kind of you. And I appreciate all of your exclamation marks. I'll say I'm definitely like a write an exclamation mark after every sentence kind of email person, and then have to go back and delete half of them. So I appreciate that review, all the exclamations and the voice that you did there. You know, just what it is. Or there's this from M. Bennett 99. This is one of the most helpful podcasts I've ever listened to. So grateful to Charlie, MTCA, all of the college representatives and MT professionals who come on and give us so much insight and advice. It is truly a gift. Thank you. Thank you. And Bennett, is truly a pleasure on our end as well. You can tell I do a lot of children's books, so I'm just always picking random voices out of the hat for any quoted text. And as you all know, of course, this podcast is a free resource, and of course, you get what you pay for. But it's a free resource that we share with all of you, whether you're an MTCA student or not. And Colleen gives us a nice rave at the end of the interview. It's very sweet about how helpful she found our green rooms that we do in all of the unified cities, which we also offer for free, another one of our complimentary bonuses. So that has me in a good mood and tempted to spare you all any kind of advertisement toward any of our MTCA paid services for this one episode. So you may go forth unadvertised to, aside from the BPN ads that you do have to skip through, but you can bloop, bloop, bloop through those. And we're going to keep everything on our end complimentary in honor of those very complimentary reviews. I will just add, I think I mentioned this at the top of this interview, but it is quite long and I think really jam-packed with a lot of great stuff that's going to be relevant to a lot of folks, but not necessarily every section is going to be relevant to every single person. That first section is really focused on the universal process that'll apply to almost everyone. It's about the first half of the interview. So whether you're a parent or a student who's going through this process or a young artist in general, I think that section will be really helpful to you. The next session focuses a little bit more on neurodivergence. And then the third diving into homeschooling and how the process is different for homeschoolers or those who may be considering it. So if not all of the sections are relevant or interesting to you, feel free to skip around or just, jump off the episode and dive right into that rating and review that you're so excited to leave us so that you can figure out what voice I will do for you. Okay, without further ado, here is the wonderful Colleen Kessler. Well, we are so excited to be joined by Colleen Kessler. Colleen has a BS in elementary education from Cleveland State University and an MA in gifted education from Kent State University. She's the author of dozens of books for children, teachers, and parents, and has the podcast Raising Lifelong Learners, where she speaks on homeschooling, raising gifted children, and neurodiversity. Also, most importantly for this podcast, she's the mother of Molly Kessler, who is a class of 2025 alumni, headed off to Otterbein to study musical theater this fall. Colleen, how are you feeling? Welcome on the pod.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. I'm feeling a little, it's the summer, 2.5 months till I have to say goodbye to my baby after spending like the whole year with her. So it's going to be interesting. All the feels right now. I'm sure you hear that from everybody.
Deeply so. And it's one of there's three reasons I'm so excited to have you on the podcast, but one of the reasons I'm so excited to have you on, aside from, I would think in general, just like our alumni parent episodes, they have gotten the best feedback in terms of the kind of episode that people say, give me more of these. I love them so much. I hear that so much from our other parents, how helpful it's to hear from parents, but especially the fact that you are such fresh meat. You have just gone through this. And that's unique, right? We've had some parents who did it last year, but you did it like a month ago. You finished you've just finished that process. So I think your perspective will be really helpful for that. Aside from the fact that you also are a podcaster yourself, which we love, and I think have some real expertise on these like two additional topics that I think we're going to talk about. We'll talk about homeschooling. We'll talk about neurodiversity, raising gifted children. The other thing, and I wonder, this is why I thought I might start us off as we get into sort of your alumni experience. I sort of saw you might be this a little bit of a Goldilocks sweet spot of what I've been looking for in the like, it seemed to me like you were an involved parent, but not an overly involved parent, right? In terms of going, it seemed like we talked about like sort of Molly's independence and how much she brought to the process, how much you brought to the process. So it's often difficult for me to get someone on the podcast if they're not a super involved parent because they don't make their way to my inbox. You did not email me 1,000 times during the process.
No.
I don't, you were not like a super present, not that there's anything wrong with those parents, but I think helpful to have that represented on the pod, the parent who's involved, but who's also, that they're sharing their relationship that way. So first off, I guess, is that fair, that third categorization of you as involved, but not overly involved? How would you sort of talk about your involvement?
Yeah, I think that I was involved in a lot of the details with regards to like college applications and things.
Uh-huh.
So like I feel almost like I was more of a secretary or an administrative assistant to her, because, and a lot of this was because, as you said before, I podcast about homeschooling. It's because I
Yeah.
homeschool, and we've been homeschooling now 16 and a half years. And so my oldest went to school for a little while, but Molly only homeschooled. And so I feel as part of my job as a homeschooler, as the
Uh-huh.
administrator of our homeschool, was I needed to take a little bit more point on that because the homeschooling piece is really different when you're applying to
Yeah.
schools in general, and then even a little bit more fraught when you're applying to these types of programs.
Yes.
And so I was all in on that administrative part, and then was like, you tell me what you need with regards to coaching or with
Yes.
regards to who you need to talk to. I proofread most of her emails,
Uh-huh.
because she wanted to make sure she was coming across both as professional but still as herself,
Yep.
and but let her take the point of all of that. And she tends to be a more reserved person, and I actually think that, for those of you parents out there listening who have a kiddo who always feels like she shouldn't bother people,
Uh-huh.
that's something to help them break through this year.
Uh-huh.
I'd have to encourage her sometimes to reach out to people to ask questions because I
Yes.
wasn't the expert and I didn't want to do it for her
Yep.
because she's leaving next year and has to know how to approach professors. So she was most comfortable with her coach Lisi, and so she would email Lisi first
Uh-huh.
for information. And then, there's that piece too, a lot of times where it's better coming from other people. You and I had that experience in the Chicago green
Yep.
room, and we could talk about that later, but needing to hear from other people and be that
Who's
person who
not your
got
mom.
the
Yeah.
answers back. So no, I didn't email anybody for the most part. We had one kind of meltdown issue in there that I emailed coaches about,
Yep.
and then they facilitated from there. But yeah, no.
You're describing to me that involved but not over.
Mhm.
That's the blending. I think that's right. And for those who you may recognize, the keen listener may recognize Molly's name. Molly did one of our unified green room interviews. So for those who listen to the episode, you'll hear Molly talk for about 5 minutes. She gives this great little snippet about skill-based improvement goals and how she would go back and do things differently if she could, sort of about her interests versus her level of what she needed. And so
Yes.
I invite you to do all that. But okay, great. So let's get into it. I want to really start off. We're going to do kind of three parts, and we'll talk about homeschooling. We'll talk about sort of neurodiversity and gifted kids, and I want to make sure we hit all those different things. But let's start off just from your perspective of Molly's process, having just gone through this. I'd love to kind of hear, the same question we ask all of our artist guests when we start them off, thinking about like, hey, what was your mission statement or what were your goals as you looked at the process? Do you kind of remember from, I guess, your perspective of Molly, but also from your own goals of like when you were thinking about this process? I think we met you at Pittsburgh Unified's Molly's junior year was
Mhm.
when you first. So, when you're around then and you're looking at schools, what were you thinking about? This is what I'm looking for in a school. This is what I hope it has for my child. And then if Molly had her own version of that.
Yeah, good question. So It's very, as everybody who's listening to this podcast knows, it's an overwhelming process.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, we had a voice teacher who, I love the voice school, but this particular voice teacher, I think, was kind of on her way out, and she was almost discouraging us from starting the process too early.
Uh-huh.
And I felt in my gut that that was wrong information.
What was her? Yeah, do you remember what her reticence was to start early?
Yeah, I think she felt that people overcomplicate the process, and
Uh-huh.
that if you start too early, you'll burn out and you won't actually have well, it won't make you as well-rounded as you think it's going to be. She even,
Mm-hmm.
actually, we ran into her not that long ago, and this was very telling of her opinion of the process itself. She's also been out of the process for a little too long to know
Uh-huh.
what's currently going on in the process, and she's more classically trained,
Uh-huh.
not musical theater.
Uh-huh.
And so she doesn't know what she doesn't know. I'm giving her grace and the benefit of the doubt.
Sure.
But she introduced Molly to a student she currently has when we ran into her recently, as someone who applied to an obscene amount of schools. And you don't need to do that to yourself, as she's
Obscene.
assuring her student. And
This is were these the schools swearing? I mean, these are like a
yeah,
filthy. How big of a number is it? Was that it was so
it was
obscene?
not. I mean, I think when all was said and done, the actual applications were like 32, and that
Uh-huh.
included like walk-ins and stuff, which is a lot,
That's
but
not a
it's
number you
not.
need to bleep out of your screen, though. I wouldn't call it obscene.
No,
No.
no. And so, so she was prejudiced towards the process, and I
Yeah.
felt like Molly wasn't getting started enough. So we heard about Pittsburgh Unifieds and went for the junior experience.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we didn't go to that this year as a senior
Yep.
because it is so early, and Molly made the conscious decision to take more time and training to have the best polished pre-screens and not rush that initial process.
Yep.
Um, but I will say, to any parent, like in their sophomore or junior years, if you're thinking about, is my kid actually competitive, is this something that they're going to be able to handle, do they really want to do this, a junior experience like that from anywhere, like some of
Yeah.
the MTCA stuff, the Pittsburgh process, there's
Totally.
other people and places that do junior things. It was probably the initial most beneficial thing we did and the best money spent.
Yeah.
She came out of that and going into all the master classes and things feeling like, yeah, I am definitely competitive. I'm not the best in this room, but I am not the worst by far.
She had
I
a sense of
have a
what it was.
place. There's a place for me. And then we met you, we met Leo. And I mean, we have to be honest, right? Leo shines in those scenarios.
Yeah.
Like, he is definitely a worker of the room,
Yep.
and made her feel very welcome. In fact, I will say this, because I'm on with you. She loves Leo. She loves Lisi. She loves Adriana. She loved Aaron and Kate, all of her coaches. But what she said at the end was, I really wish I'd spent more time getting to know Charlie,
Mm.
because she really enjoyed your conversations in the green room, both in New York and Chicago, and hadn't had the opportunity to really talk to you because we were a la carte
Yep.
members of the family. And so we couldn't get to New York as often as
Yep.
we would have loved to. And she really got so much out of those conversations, which just speaks to all of the different aspects that you guys bring. So, so that's how our process started.
You can let her know she missed out on nothing. She must just to be safe. I'm really good in small doses, so like she got the perfect amount of just a
I
dose
will let her know that.
of Charlie. No, I that makes so much sense, and I think really smart to sort of speak toward what something like a Pittsburgh Unified, and this is true of other organizations like this too. It's a mix of an audition experience, but also like a college fair. It's not exactly that, but like it seemed like you got an experience of like understanding what the audition experience was, an introduction to all these schools, and then you go, all right, now I can make the choice of how do I want to lean forward in my senior year, having started that early.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it's really interesting. Also, like, I mean, I think obscene is a little bit much, but I can understand. I mean, I think it's often a kernel of truth in even people who I disagree with their opinion. I'm like, there's definitely is a danger of. We certainly wouldn't want someone to feel overcoached or be like drilling their material for 2 straight years. There's certainly, but I think often in people correctly identifying, this has been said about politicians who are like, oh, they identify the problem correctly, but they don't always have the right solution. That I'm like, I don't think not starting is the way to avoid being overcoached. It's don't overcoach is the issue. Like
Yeah.
don't shellac your process. Like if you don't want to do 50 schools, don't do 50 schools. You don't have to do 50 schools just because you do Pittsburgh Unifieds or those kind of things.
Right, absolutely. Well, and Molly did a few walk-ins and didn't ultimately apply to those schools, even though they were really successful walk-ins. The experience, there's value in the experience. And then with
Yes.
regards to the starting early, I would say you're absolutely right. You don't want to overwork your material because you're going to get tired of it,
Yeah.
but you need to have a feel for what builds a well-rounded package.
Right.
And you can't start that process in September.
That's right. And all the opportunity costs of like, so yes, sure. If you pick material that works perfect for you and you work it consistently for X amount of total time, that can work great. And not starting too early ensures you won't overwork it. But it also means that if you wanted to change the piece, if you want to, now you lose that opportunity. But if you have some skill based improvements you want to make, now you would lose those opportunities if you start later. Yeah. And that I love that Unifies example is such a good, the walk-in at Unifies is such a good example where I'll hear families say that of like, well, I don't want to apply to another school, so I shouldn't do it. You don't have to. So if you don't want to apply to another, don't apply to another school. Doesn't mean you
Right.
should have the experience still. But wait, we're getting a little bit sidetracked from. I wanted to talk about the sort of mission statement and the list side of things because again, a lot of our parents, I think that's where if they're listeners, they may feel if whether they're in the more administrative assistant mode or I'm more of the COO helper, whatever version of involved they are, I think they often feel like they are helping with stuff like school list research and forming that list. I'm looking at the list that you came in to our initial consult with, which is like 50 schools long, meaning that you were someone who actually cut it down to
Yeah.
get to ultimately 32. So just, I guess, can you talk about like what was the research that went into the list that you came in with and that you ended up with, right? How did that process go for you as you're adding schools to get to that list and then culling schools to get to the ultimate ones you'll apply to?
Yeah. So I did a lot of that initial research because it was overwhelming for Molly. And really, I think like a lot of kids get stuck on the ones that they hear about over and over again. And so those were the only ones she was coming back at me with. There were a couple that she really knew she didn't want that are great programs, but she knows a lot of people that go there and she just because they're local. We're really fortunate, and it's strange that we're fortunate in Ohio to have so many options. But Ohio has a ton of great options. And some of those options, even though they're great, would feel like an extension of high school to somebody who lives in Ohio. And so we had some on her list that actually were put on by coaches initially that we knew she didn't want to apply to because she didn't want to end up there because she would feel like she wasn't, starting over. Not starting over, that's the wrong term, but going somewhere with herself.
No, that was from us. Penn State was that way for it. Penn State's a fantastic school, but you went to school in Pittsburgh. It was just like so many kids are at Penn State, even though actually was their experience at that big school. Who knows? But people felt that way. It was like, oh God, that's so many people.
Kent State was that for Molly because it's a great program, but it's very local. I went there for my master's.
Yes.
And she knows like 5 people in the current freshman class. So, and she's done shows with them. So she wouldn't be pushing herself to,
have a new experience.
And so in any case, we came in with a lot with the idea that we would need to pare it down. And so a lot of those were reach schools. We knew that. And I actually think the majority of ours were nice middle ground. And we didn't come in. There's 1 or 2 on that initial list that are just BAs. And just BAs isn't the right, but like just BAs where there was no audition for the the safety that you want to have.
Most of these are audition-based programs.
And and ultimately, a lot of those audition-based programs also have BA programs. So one of our initial kind of calling experiences was when we submitted the academic applications, and she was initially academically accepted to some of those schools that also had BAs. We took off any of the other BAs because we had a safety already. Like she was admitted academically to Slippery Rock and Ohio Northern, and Ohio Northern I think only has a BFA. Anyway, she was accepted to a couple places that had both BFAs and BAs, so we knew she could go somewhere for musical theater.
So and we did another application.
So that was our initial calling, and then after talking it through with both Leo and Lisi, there were a couple others like we put on. Like Montclair, after talking to Adriana, who went there, and then took off a couple others because after she did a little bit more looking at their campuses, she wasn't really interested. So
I love it. Yeah. I mean, was there, and of the 32 it ended up being, how many of those were in the first round pre-screen applications and how many were added in after walk-ins, after other sort of audition experiences?
Yeah, I think most of them were in our initial like pre-screen application process. There were, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5, I think, after walk-ins. And then a couple that were like Okay, and this is full disclosure, mom panic.
Here we are.
Like, I'm not sure we have enough.
Yeah.
Because, and let's throw this one in and throw this one in, because Molly has a very distinct color to her voice. We've
Hmm.
been told this by multiple different people. She's routinely cast in community theater and high school theater and youth theater. But she's also a girl of average height with blondish brown hair and brown eyes, and looked like dozens of other people around and sounded similar. And so there's that panic when you're in such a competitive. Plus, we then learned, this current class was one of the largest classes
Yeah.
ever.
Yeah.
And so there were a couple panic ads, which was ridiculous because ultimately she had like 19 acceptances to
No,
BFA programs,
made it obscene.
or
You turned
16,
it obscene. No, I
16.
have the list here. I have the list here. Quick glance looks like 18. I see
Yeah.
18. Well, I see 18 results. That's some acceptances a wait list. I'm not sure how accurate the up-to-date data wait list. Maybe you'll give it to me live on the pod. But yeah, so that's where, and it's also some of it, as an informed person who started early, and again, that's where some of I think the intention of your voice teacher saying, hey, you don't have to panic. It is going to be okay.
Mhm.
Some of that is this process gets so drawn out, right? You do the pre-screens, and then there's the waiting, and then there's the auditions, and then there's the waiting. And so that's like in those moments to go, should we do more? Do we have enough? Even though it's like you could already have 5 acceptances and not even know it yet. Like they're
Right.
already there waiting for you, but you don't know that until you know that. So a little
Yeah.
bit of that panic sets in
The
there.
waiting was more excruciating than I thought it was going to be for
Oh,
both of us. It felt like you were in this weird limbo.
yeah. Well, and that has gotten worse. Not only sometimes the length of time that you're waiting, but now more and more schools which do the kind of pool of consideration. It's not a yes or it used to be like pretty quickly you get a yes or a no or a wait list, and now you get these results that are like, what are you telling me? Like I'm
Yeah.
kind of interested in the third date. Let's talk about this. And you're like, is it yes? It's a no. Where are we? But wait, before I get too much into the minutia, and I want to do more minutia. Just is there anything from just the broad perspective of just having just gone through this a month
Mhm.
ago? Whew, you finish the waiting, the deposit is down. Is there some wisdom that you feel like you've gained of like, hey, here's what I would tell parents. This is what the experience was for me, and here's what I learned from it.
Yeah. I think that if I were to go back, and I've heard this from other parents too, and I'm going to tell any parent that's listening who is about to go through this process, this is easier said than done. I would
Hmm.
enjoy the process more, and I
Hmm.
would take it less seriously, because even I got caught up in that. I would encourage my daughter to do that.
Hmm.
I would like pad our time with auditions to have a little bit more downtime at
Yep.
any of the locations so we could do things. There were a couple places that just, because of the way the auditions like fell, we had this downtime and we went to like some thrift stores and bought those like
Hmm.
blind bags of random stuff and sat in the hotel room with takeout pizza, going through these random halls of jewelry and filming
Yep.
videos. Like that is the stuff that we're going to remember 20 years from now. And I don't think we did enough of that. I
Yep.
wish that we had done more of that, but it's really, really easy to get caught up in the intensity of it, because when you're in like the weeds of it, whether it's a unifieds or an on-campus audition, it's very easy to get caught up in like, this is life and death, even for our kids who are easygoing.
Yep.
And I probably would, and here's a practical thing I would say to people. If there is a school that your child really is interested or even marginally interested in, I would schedule those later
Hmm.
in the process. We did that to an extent. The couple that we did first were not ones that she was really excited about and would have been okay with no's, which was great because she was a different auditioner
Of
in
course.
March than she
Different
was
person. Yeah.
in January even. But her first on campus audition, I didn't think that one through enough. I
Uh-huh.
wish we had done an on campus audition for a school she didn't care that much
Smart.
about,
Yes.
because she froze a little
Yes.
and had all sorts of great feedback. And I think if that particular audition had been at a unified, the energy
Hmm.
would have been different and it would have been a different outcome. And so I would say any that are really important. I also thought to myself, any that are really important would be important to do on campus. And I
Mm.
don't think that's the case. I
Totally agree.
actually think she had more success at unifieds because of the energy that was in the room. So
Yeah.
I would do more unifieds and less on campus auditions.
And I think that's not necessarily universal advice. There are people
Mhm.
who do better on campus. I think unifies and on campus are both equally successful
Yes.
opportunities in terms, but people do, many do sort of bias toward on campus because the schools tell you, oh, come on campus, that's your best chance. But the schools mean that's their best chance. They know they'll get you if you visited and you've seen a show and all this thing, but they're not admitting you at a higher rate because you go on campus. And some people love the experience of a whole weekend focusing on audition. But to your point, especially for people who do struggle with nerves, it is a whole different kind of audition. It's like an away game versus a home game. Like it is a different experience when you're on a campus and you spend all day waiting for one audition versus when you have 4 auditions. It's just there's more pressure. Even if the stakes of the schools are the same, it's a different kind of pressure when you're like, I've been waiting since 10 a.m. for this 4 p.m. audition on this one campus. Yeah, it's a whole different thing. It's
And
really
there
well.
really is no difference. I don't think people believe that. I know I didn't fully believe it. There is no difference between the virtual and the unifieds and the on campus.
Yeah.
There just isn't. We had acceptances at all 3.
Yep.
And some of those acceptances didn't feel like they were her best work. She felt crummy afterwards.
Yep.
And they were still well received. So when people tell you that there is no difference, you need to schedule what's convenient for you, they actually mean it.
Yeah, I love that, and I love the advice about ease, which I think that's a kind of general parenting advice. That I think people say, "Oh, for your second kid, it's easy. You just don't take everything as drastic. They'll be fine. They're probably not that sick. Like all the stuff that you panic over with your first kid." I do think in watching the process too, finding the balance of ease
Mhm.
also does make you more competitive in the process. It's not just that you will enjoy it more. It's like if you can find the level of joy of like, here I am, I'm having fun auditioning, that is better for you too. I mean, you can't just be laissez-faire, like have fun and not have done any work. But if you did the work, which most of our students come in having
yeah.
done the work, being ready, then the more of that ease is it's not just, so you enjoy it more. It is also for your competitiveness. You audition better when you're joyful and loose and all those things. What about, do you agree with Molly's assessment that she made in this was in the Unified Green Room video of more vocal tech earlier in the process? That was her sort of self-assessment of what I would have done differently. You mentioned the ease. Would you also, say, hey, that was advice that I think that I would co-sponsor?
Yeah, I think she stressed more about the dance pre-screen video and the dance calls because that's her weakest area. And so she naturally wanted more of our in-person one-on-one coaching and then the coaching, virtually with Adriana. And they were very beneficial to her.
Yeah.
But she had a vocal injury 2 years ago and had been working with a voice therapist at the Cleveland Clinic's Voice Center, off and on for very consistently for a year, and then off and on for the last year. And there were a couple pieces of her voice that just weren't, like, she couldn't get them back exactly. And we never really looked into the vocal tech stuff through MTCA. And Lisi and her were working through something, and Lisi's like, I really think you should talk to Mackenzie. Okay, Mackenzie, shout out, like, phenomenal. Molly already has plans to keep working with Mackenzie, throughout college and beyond, even if it's just like a once a month or every 6 week check-in. But in her first session with him, she felt like it was more valuable than 6 months of work with her vocal therapist, because it was because vocal tech is different than vocal therapy, and it's different than song coaching, and it's different than voice work. It gave her a deeper understanding of her voice, and she took a lot of that actually into her senior production, where she played Dragon in Shrek, which is a very vocally complex song and long. I mean, it's a 5.5-minute song, and ultimately won a supporting actor
hey, now let's go
from it. And she really credits it, her critiques, her adjudication specifically spoke to the control in her voice, the choices that she made technically, and that was all based on the tech work she did. And so in retrospect, she's thinking, like, if I had started tech when it was first brought up in my first consult with Leo, how much further would I have been?
Sure.
So yeah, there's definite truth to that, but you can't always know where the work, because her work with Lisi was equally, transformative. Her work with Kate before Kate booked was equally transformative. Her work with Aaron after Kate booked was equally transformative. So I think that just figuring, definitely continue working on your strengths and lean into your weaknesses, but don't forget about your strengths. Continue. It's too often we lean more heavily into our weaknesses in this process, but you need to set yourself apart in the room. So you need to really be strong in your strength and then be good in your
Yeah,
weakness.
it's a both and. I mean,
Mhm.
that is the first. I'll just say for those, if you're a little bit of a younger listener and you're like, wait, did she say vocal tech is different than vocal therapy, which is different than song work? Isn't that all singing? It's like, yes, this is an advanced level of understanding, but it is. They are different things. So the idea of vocal therapy, vocal health versus vocal tech, working on your technique, singing versus what the work you're doing when you're acting while singing is
Mhm.
all related to each other, but they're four different ideas. So I just want to make sure I said that. But I totally agree with the strengths and weaknesses we talk about on the pod a lot. It's like we want you to lean into to not lean away from your weaknesses out of fear, but that doesn't mean you don't need to accentuate your strengths, which often are the things that get you into the room too. So,
Mhm.
and in Molly's case, I mean, I know she had mentioned in the interview that, and I think I said a bit of this in that green room thing. She was like, but I'm just loving the work of my acting class. I'm
Yes.
just loving it. And to me, I'm like, well, there's nothing wrong with pursuing the thing that you love. Maybe that's going to evolve, that some of these schools are actually acting schools with musical theater minors or whatever. But then she said, but I do want musical theater as the degree. Well, okay, then you do have to work on those musical theater things as much. That's it. But it's hard to give blanket advice because some students who start out musical theater find they love acting and they go, well, I'm going to be a singer, but I'm going to study acting because that's the thing I love them. And so it's like I don't want to
Yeah.
tell parents always make them stop acting and go dance if that's the thing they love. If everyone's got different goals. It's sort of like what is that goal, and does the actual dream evolve too? May
Mm.
happen as well.
Yeah, well, actually, and that's a good point and a good segue because the idea of the dream evolving and the goal, your kids really do need a goal,
Mhm.
and we need to honor their goals. That was one of the things. So if you're looking at her acceptances,
Yep.
ultimately they were split. Like
I
she
see.
she
Empty
initially did
acting.
not want to
Yeah.
audition for any acting only programs
Yep.
because she really does want the training because she knows she is a natural and intuitive actor.
Yes.
Now, coming like midway through the process, she did say to me at one point, I wish I had decided to audition for Juilliard and Carnegie
Uh-huh.
Mellon, where she
Hmm.
took those off of her lists initially because they're expensive for us.
Hmm.
And she knew if she went for one of those two programs, she was going to go for acting.
Hmm.
And she really ultimately wanted to spend her 4 years training in all four, even if she ends up doing more acting in
Yep.
her career. She really is a gifted actress. That
Yep.
that is her gifting, which is why she had redirects, which
Yep.
is why she had like one of the programs actually accepted her on the spot for acting and waitlisted her for musical
Uh-huh.
theater. And
Yep.
so then she's going back and forth and having like a mid audition season identity crisis.
Uh-huh.
Like maybe I'm actually not cut out for musical theater and I should just lean heavily into acting and go for acting. And her final two choices came down between two very different programs,
Yep.
Ithaca Acting and
Yep.
Otterbein Musical Theater.
Yep.
And so, based on her initial goal of graduating college after 4 years of intense training in all three areas, Otterbein's the clear winner
Yep.
because they treat all three equally. They really intensely train you. But in the idea of maybe I need to rethink my career goals and lean really into my acting strength, Ithaca makes more sense.
Yes.
And though you're comparing apples and oranges at that point.
Yep.
And so the soul searching that had to happen at that point and the conversations with coaches, including Leo and Lisi, and then people around us who have gone to both programs or knew both programs, to get down to, okay, what do you really want to get out of your training?
Yep.
And after doing a lot of deep searching, it was like, I really want to get in my undergrad all three and then potentially go back and get a master's in acting.
Yep.
And
I love
so,
that, and I love the idea that they need a goal. They need that because the goal needs rigor to it. That you have to be able to stick to. Like, hey, is this a moment of doubt that I need to push through? But it's also like, but also holding on to it loosely enough that if it does, it seems like you did do that. That down to the end, we considered an actual acting school. That could she have gotten musical training in Ithaca? Of course, but
mhm,
it wouldn't have been the same as what she's going to get out of it.
right.
Before we jump to I love that we already know the final two. We saw the 18 that we're into. Can you talk about the process of how did you? Because 18, I imagine you did not visit 18 schools, right? So how did you arrive at the process of narrowing down to? Was it a final five before we got to a final two? How did that work
Yeah.
for you?
Yeah. There were a couple that like kind of went off right away. They were like acceptances on the spots at walk for as a walk-in
Sure.
or ones that she put on the list because she felt she had to. Like one of them was a state school in
Your
our
panic
state.
schools went back out. The panic went
Right.
in, the panic came out.
Exactly. Like one was a state school in our state that she knew she really didn't want to go to, but she felt she had to apply because it's by far the most affordable. And when we went down to it, a couple of the other options were close, would have been a little bit more money, but having the discussion, I'm actually glad we did that for parents, because I can show it's not just about the money.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be great to go to the cheapest school for you, but when there's just only a couple thousand in there, let's talk about what you're going to get out of it.
Yep.
And so we took off ones that were just way too expensive, didn't come down enough, ones that she just really applied to because she got accepted in a walk-in, one she applied to as a safety. And then we pulled it down to 4 initially, and then she got off a wait list of 1. So we put that on there too. And then we created a chart. I actually might even have it really
I'm
close.
not doing the visual. She's looking for the chart.
I know, it's like behind me, I think, because I don't think I threw it away. Do you want me to grab it? I can show you.
Sure, yeah, go.
Okay, hold on. So like we created this like chart of the final, whatever, 5 schools. And there were, it's like the scorecard that you'll hear about, Leo talks about. I'm sure you talk about it too, Charlie. And I got to put my old lady glasses on to read my
now
print.
old lady glasses. She looks, for those not watching the video, gorgeous, but now more like an old lady.
Totally, more like an old lady. So we had the cost after financial aid, and then the curriculum and the campus. So we didn't visit all of them. We had visited 4 of these because they were either close or we auditioned. In fact, the only 2 that we ended up visiting after acceptance that weren't, because we went there for the audition, were Ithaca and Otterbein, the final 2, in the final weekend that we needed to be making that decision. And we did it back to back. I think that that's a good thing to do because the comparisons were fresh and authentic. But it was like, I wanted to show the cost, because you really have to have that discussion. And not just, here's something, and Lisi said this to Molly, not me. And it kind of transformed the way Molly thought about the cost, was don't just think about the cost, because as smart as our kids are, and Molly's smart, she got accepted in the honors programs at all these schools. It's hard for a 17, 16, 18-year-old to comprehend what the payment looks like after graduation. The cost of attending is very different than the practical payment that they're going to have, the money that they're going to have as an income, and the expenses of living if they don't want to come back and live in your basement or their old room. And so we talked about all of those things. We talked about, there was a comparison of, what do the stages look like? What does the training look like? What if it is an acting program, because 2 of these 5 were acting programs, what's the crossover? How easy is it to get into a dance class or a voice teacher? And so we did that, and we had lots of hard discussions. And I will say, I relied heavily on Leo and Lisi for these conversations, because parents, ultimately, they have to make the decision. Yes, you're paying. Like, there were a couple schools I was like, I can't pay that. You can apply, and you need to know you're taking out loans. We're co-signing, and as soon as we can, we're transferring them in your name, because I have 2 other kids to get through college. But while you're paying initially, or signing them up or co-signing for loans, ultimately it's their life, and they need to be able to make that decision.
Well, and I think everything you said is so true. And adding in the factor, especially if you want to do theater primarily, of like early on, the jobs that you might take, even when you're working, it's not just about when you're not working. When you're working, the jobs you might take are not going to pay at a level where you're going to be able to easily pay off loans as well. So that it also in some ways limits the flexibility you might need in the first couple of years of your career to go take regional theater jobs that don't pay a ton of money. And what does that look like? And there are definitely times when you're making more as a bartender than you are when you switch back to being an actor for a second. And so to be able to go like, oh, my loans are the reason I can't go do this job that doesn't pay much but is super exciting artistically. There's definitely a burden to that for sure. You mentioned, can we just talk while we're talking scholarships? Did you guys do some negotiating? Did you talk through in those 5? How did that work with you negotiating with different schools?
So it worked really well for a couple and not so great for a couple.
Sure.
And ultimately, I think that was the final decision making between Otterbein and Ithaca. Ithaca was much more expensive than Otterbein for us, and they wouldn't go. They gave us their best offer, and Otterbein's best offer was significantly better, and then weighing the ultimate cost at the end. But then a couple other schools negotiated with us too, so there were a couple that came close at the end there to eking out one of the final 2. But Ultimately, she knew that one of those two places was where she belonged. It was That was my hardest thing, because that really does come from the parents. Like,
Yep.
you they know you're going to be talking about finances,
For
and
sure.
some of that they want it from the kid. But I'll be completely honest and transparent here. I wrote as Molly. I
For
went into
sure.
her email box. I
Yeah.
wrote as her. I negotiated as her. If they
Yeah.
wanted to talk to the kid, because my 17-year-old is not equipped mentally
No.
and emotionally to handle that kind of negotiation. I
As
have
most
no
25-year-olds aren't.
Yeah, right.
That quite.
I'm 50 and I'm not emotionally responsible
Available.
enough
Yeah.
to do that sometimes. But I had no problem when the conversation was difficult, saying to Molly, and I always ask her permission, do you want me to go in your email and
Hmm.
write as you? And
Hmm.
she would be like, nope, I can do this one. Or, yeah, could you please do that?
Yeah.
Parents, I think that as society, like, you get one of like two very diametrically opposed opinions on this. Like, you can't do anything because they have to be independent,
Hmm.
or I'm going to do whatever my kid needs. You have to meet somewhere in the middle. Yes, they have to be independent. They absolutely do, but they're kids.
Yep.
They're literal kids, and they don't know how to have these conversations. And so you do have to be them for them sometimes. And there's no shame in that. There's no shame if your kid is someone who emotionally, or because they have anxiety or another neurodivergency, you need to step in more. It is totally okay. And if the school can't recognize you for their reasons,
Yep.
just be your child in their inbox.
I love that. You reminded me of, I've heard so many famous stories of celebrities who don't have assistants but
Yes.
pretend like they have assistants. Where they're right, it's like, I'm sorry, this is George's assistant over here. He's not
Yeah.
available at 2 o'clock. When it's like just them, they're just like, I don't want to be the one saying no, but I get to play. That's where certainly we tell the parents, like, you can always, we tell the kids too, you can always blame. Oh, my
Yeah.
mean mom is saying this. She's saying I won't pay a dime more than whatever, even though it's
Yeah.
you pretending to be yourself as your child. Now we're getting deep into the meta. But I want to talk a little bit about, we'll talk in a second on the break here. We're going to talk about neurodiversity and some different aspects in terms of your other children. Just what was your experience? So you're homeschooling your kids.
Hmm.
You have other kids.
Hmm.
How are you juggling the other balls in your life while you're also navigating? People talk about this like a full-time job, which it can be. What about all the other full-time jobs you have? And how did you survive the last year, if you
Yeah.
did?
You want the truth?
Yes, I do. That's what we're
I
here for.
dropped a lot of those balls.
There you go. Yeah. Okay. Which balls got dropped? Are these kids are going to be mad at you? Your job's going to be mad. What's the most dropped ball?
So, for me, I work from home. I have my own business. I'm a podcaster. I write books. I have a membership community for families who homeschool neurodivergent kids. And that ball got dropped a lot, in that I was not super present on social media, which drives business.
Yeah.
I didn't create new things, or the new things that I had were not getting promoted. I did the things that were already that needed to be done. Like, I
Yeah.
had podcasts going up because I have a sponsor for my podcast, so
Yeah.
I honored that contract. I had the content in my membership community going up because I have paid community members who expected that. And then beyond that, nothing else got done. So I'm
Yeah.
digging out of this huge, like, ridiculously overwhelming pile of
Yep.
work that should have been done over the last 6 months that hasn't been.
Yep.
And my other kids, now thankfully, my younger two are 15 and 12,
Yep.
and they've only homeschooled.
Uh-huh.
So we stripped things down to what in my homeschooling we call our must do's. Like, they
Yep.
did math, they did a little bit of writing and a little bit of reading and some
Mhm.
handwriting every single day. And then everything else, like, is all the extras, because you can always catch up science and history and things like that. So they watched documentaries and they read books, but they didn't do anything that I needed to facilitate or check
Uh-huh.
beyond the 3 R's, right?
Yeah.
And then their activities, their outside activities. So we stripped everything way down, and we're going to do some more over the summer, because
Yep.
you can always catch up, and it's just part of our life. So there was no way we could
Yes.
do everything. And so everything else had to be kind of like stripped down to the bare necessities. Like, we had a lot of, easy meals to prepare. We ate a lot of
Uh-huh.
convenience foods instead of me cooking from scratch. We
Yep.
got backed up on our laundry. Everybody ended up taking over their own laundry. It really is a full-time job. And if you homeschool, and I know there are other homeschool parents
Yes.
whose kids are going
A
through
good
this,
question about it. Yeah.
it feels extremely overwhelming, because as a homeschool parent, you're the administrator and you're the
Yep.
counselor and you're the record keeper. And the schools need information that the counselors at the high schools typically present or produce to them, or give them, and you have to come up with this. I bought templates online
Mm-hmm.
for creating my transcripts and counselor letters and recommendations and things, so I didn't have to reinvent the wheel and then just
Yep.
tweaked those. I over shared the stuff that my
Yep.
kids had done in their homeschool and our philosophies, so that the academic acceptance was the easy part.
Yep. Yep. It's like,
So they had more information than they needed. And any homeschool parent that wants to know what we did, like, you can email me.
yeah.
Be-
Well, and we have a bunch more to talk about. I got a whole section on homeschooling I want to do, but I do think just holding on to the balance sides of things too, of just
yeah.
like recognizing something has to go.
Yeah, you can't
To,
balance anything. I mean,
you cannot
balance is
juggle
a
all
myth
of them.
anyway, right? You're always going to be dropping balls. You need to make sure that the balls you drop aren't the ones that
Yep.
break
Which
and
balls
are
do it?
irrevocable.
Yeah, exactly
Like,
right. That's,
it has to be the stuff that can bounce and you can go back to.
yep.
Like, my younger kids and I have had a lot of Starbucks dates and random ice cream dates,
Yep.
so we can connect. The connection is the thing I can't drop. We
Yep.
can always come back to science. We can
Right.
always come back to history.
Yeah.
So
That
that's
I mean, I talk about it with my wife all the time when we will decide, can we do this job? Can we do, can we do this Steven Spielberg movie for a week? Yes, but much if it was 2 months, I don't think no, I could do every single bit of parenting and my job. Like there's certain things you go like, what can we handle? What cannot we not handle? And
right.
and but almost always the answer is something can physically be done, but something will give. I mean, there will
Yeah.
be balls that are dropped and things that are not accomplished and all those things. Wait, let's take the break and I have two whole other sections of the podcast I want to get to. So let's throw this to a break and we'll be back in a flash with Colleen Kessler. Okay, we're back with Colleen Kessler, MTCA mom and podcast host of Raising Lifelong Learners. So let's talk about these factors. I've been hinting we're going to talk about homeschooling and we're going to talk about neurodiversity a little bit.
Mhm.
And I imagine they may weave together, so we don't have to keep
Yeah.
it totally separate. But, we've had a few conversations touching on neurodiversity and diversity of ability in different ways. I thought maybe it'd be helpful just for anyone who that's newer to, and I'm sure many people it's not, but for anyone who it is, can we do a little definition of terms when we're speaking about like neurodiverse children? What does that mean definitionally? And like, what are some examples of neurodiversity in terms of how it might manifest?
Yeah, so I'll go by like how I define it.
Yeah.
So my master's, like Charlie mentioned in the very beginning, is in gifted education, and with a special focus on social and emotional needs of kids who are gifted and twice exceptional. Twice exceptional is just any other kind of neurodivergency that and giftedness. So neurodivergency is when it's divergent from what the brain is average, like normal is not the right word, but
Right.
like neurotypical. So the majority of people hit developmental milestones around the same time. They
Yeah.
think about things in a pretty typical way, which is why there's a bell curve, right? You have the average on the bell curve for a reason, because the majority of people hit that, whether it's in academics, whether it's in social and emotional development, whether it's in like physical development. And then you have those who diverge from that wherever that is. And neurodivergence is when they diverge neurologically.
Yeah.
So they could diverge neurologically, meaning their IQ is significantly higher or significantly lower
Yep.
than average. It could be an anxiety thing. Their brains are in a constant state of like fight, flight, freeze. They could be on the autism spectrum and have just a different kind of qualitative experience of life.
Mm-hmm.
They could be very sensitive, like sensory processing type issues, where their emotional regulation, their physical regulation, their emotional regulation is difficult for them to maintain. They could have ADHD,
Mm-hmm.
any kind of difference that is uh, quantitatively different than the typical child,
Yep.
is what I'm talking about when I talk about neurodiversity.
And what level? I mean, you mentioned the bell curve. Like, is there a percentage of away from the mean or something? Because it feels like I was just talking about one of my friends. It's like feels like almost everybody is like, well, I'm not neurotypical. Like there's something about me that's even if it's I have some ADHD tendencies, or it's like
Mhm.
it feels like it's kind of sometimes tough in this world as we understand it better and better
Yeah.
to define you are this or you have this versus you're somewhere toward this, or I guess what are we talking about in terms of what percentage of people would be neurodiverse by the way we would define it?
Yeah, I can't speak specifically to the percentage, but I can say that like when we're talking about giftedness, it's
Yeah.
2 standard deviations above the average IQ.
Yeah.
if we're talking about that bell curve. So two standard deviations, two like sections. Same thing with developmentally delayed,
Uh-huh.
cognitively delayed, two standard deviations below.
Okay. Yep.
When we're talking about kids who are anxious or have ADHD or sensory processing, it's to a degree that it affects all aspects of their life. So
Uh-huh.
maybe you're a little ADHD, or you use that
Yeah.
colloquially because you tend to squirrel if you're working on a task you're not super interested in. But
Uh-huh.
if you can focus in every other aspect of your life, you probably don't have ADHD. You
Yep.
just don't want to focus in something that you don't want to focus in.
Yep.
And that's normal. But yeah, it is like you could feel very off when you're, in that situation. Or you
Yep.
might be somebody who has stage fright and is really, really stressed out or worried before an
Right.
audition, but you don't have that anxiety with any other part of your life. So I wouldn't say that you then have anxiety. You're just nervous when it really matters
Most
to you.
people has an element of audition anxiety. Very few people have no audition anxiety. That would
Right.
be odd in the other way.
So when we're talking about kids or adults even, but kids for our purposes who are neurodivergent, these are kids who have some kind of challenge, cognitive, physical, academic, that gets in the way of everything they do to some degree. They have
Yep.
better coping mechanisms in some areas than others, but it's going to affect them no matter what, and could, especially in the case of autism or anxiety, rear its head at any
Yep.
time, and you just don't know when that's going to happen.
Yep. And can we talk about some, especially in the college application process, how does it rear its head, or what
Yeah.
what are some of the obstacles and challenges of going through this? I know many of our students go through it as neurodiverse students and have these struggles, and I think it's something that we as a company are trying to be like, how do we help them more? How do we, more specifically address those needs? Because I think it's something, 20 years ago we just did not have that much level of awareness. We didn't,
Right.
certainly. I think the culture didn't, but as a company we didn't. But I still love to hear, like, what are those obstacles and what are those challenges from
Mhm.
from a
Yeah.
student?
So, like from personal experience, and I can share this: the perfectionism piece that comes along with anxiety or high IQ can make it so it's really hard to get essays written,
Oof.
because we can't just write an essay. It's got to be the best essay I've ever written in my entire life, or I will have no chance at all of ever getting
Yeah.
accepted to any school. And then you're like, now you're down to the 20-minute wire of the deadlines approaching, and you've got to submit it to multiple schools. So when you've got a kiddo who is very anxious or perfectionistic, or that kind of thing, you need to make sure that you give yourself extra time, or you have somebody that is different than you
Yeah.
that can say, no, this is actually good enough,
Yep.
you can submit this. Or
Yep.
so it's gonna show itself in those areas. It's gonna show it in, like, I don't think I did really well when everybody else around them thinks that they did well, and we can't recover from it. Um, or like a hyperventilation situation, like an overwhelm, and you need to, like, taking a deep breath is not going to make it go away. Like, you have
Uh-huh.
to understand what's going on in the body. I try to teach my kids in particular. I've got two that do have anxiety and anxiety disorder, that statistically, a panic attack, when it gets to that point, has a half-life of about 7 minutes,
Hmm.
meaning an average anxiety attack's not going to last longer than 14 minutes. So if you
Hmm.
meet the 7-minute mark, you're already coming down on the other end of it.
Hmm.
Anybody can do anything for 14 minutes.
Hmm.
So when we can talk through it intellectually, or understand the chemistry of the brain or what the brain is doing, a kiddo who's very smart and has a challenge can latch onto that intellect to kind of intellectualize themselves through,
Yep.
which is why, to use a very specific example, when we were having a struggle point in Chicago, and you asked me how things were going, and I said it's not going really great, and you asked me what was going on, I said, actually, why don't you go ask her?
Uh-huh.
Because me describing it would have been overheard and would have taken away any authority that,
Hmm.
or coaching, like mentorship, that you had. And she, like, it could not be heard from the parent at that point.
Yep.
And many parents of any kind of anxious or neurodivergent kiddo is going to say that, like, they don't, I'm their safe spot, so they're just going to, like, melt down with me.
Yep.
And then somebody else that can come at it from a more um, just outside perspective might be able to talk them through in a way that we couldn't if we're
Yep.
in the emotion with them.
Yep, that's well said. And I think you mentioned the essays, but obviously I think what a lot of our students struggle with also with perfectionism is the pre-screens too. That
Oh,
we've had students who've literally said, "I need you to take Like they're like, I need to work with Matt Simpkins because I need to not have the choice to refilm. But it's like I
Yeah.
just have to because have it be good enough and move on because I will never let myself stop otherwise.
We ultimately did that too. We hired Lisi to be on the computer and said at the end of this hour, we have to have
It is-
a take of the two songs because we've
Yep.
taken too many tries. And we did.
Yep.
Lisi's like, that one's submittable. Don't go any further.
Yep. I feel like it's half my job now as a coach slash husband or whatever when we're doing 10 p.m. self tapes of being it's good enough. It's probably 80%, but we gotta sleep. So
Mhm.
we're finishing with that one. I don't know that it's getting better.
Well, and that's a good, what you just said, that 80% for our really talented individuals.
Yep.
And I mean, let's face it, anybody that is going through this process is already in the higher percentage
Yep.
because the people who kind of want to do it aren't going to put the time and the money into it that it's going to take because it does take both time and money. And so anybody at this level could be successful.
Yep.
And so anybody at this level, their 80% is better than the majority of the population's 110%. Molly and I just had this conversation because we were talking through, I keep trying to have different conversations about, prepping for when I'm not there, when she's in college. And I said, one of the things I think you're going to have to remember is turning papers and things in
Uh-huh.
when they're 80%, because your 80% is actually probably more like a 95 or 100%. And you have to let yourself,
Perception of 80% is
yeah,
95%
like
actually.
done is better than perfect. We
Right.
have to get that mantra. And so the 80% or the done is better than perfect is something our kids need to start hearing as just a
Mhm.
regular part of our daily conversation. So when we get to the audition process, it doesn't feel like you're just saying that because everybody tells you to say that.
Yeah. It's so well said. So well said. From a kind of broader neurodiversity perspective, I think one of the most hotly debated questions we get, and I've gotten it for years in many different forms. We talked about it a little bit on the podcast, but I'm kind of interested in your perspective of like what to disclose, when to
Mhm.
disclose, how to disclose. I gave a version of my answer already, which is that like in general, I think I'm in favor of more transparency than less. But I do feel like there is a weight of opinions on the other side of things that I'm not totally sure exactly where it comes from. I think I must be countering some advice that comes from a neurodiverse community of non-disclosure, of not want or of wanting to not disclose. I think I'm especially thinking of like our students with autism on this
Mhm. Yeah.
this world, though I think it could apply to some other things too. But like our autistic students maybe are a little bit worried of being judged if they disclose it. Oh, they're going to think this means X about me, and I actually think I can pass, and so I'm going to pretend not to not disclose it or some way. So I guess I'll throw it to you generally, and then maybe we can get some specifics. But how do you feel about that idea of like how you should disclose, if you should disclose, when you should disclose, et cetera?
Yeah, I think that that's one of those things, and it feels like a non-answer, but it really is the answer, that it depends.
Yeah,
It totally depends on the situation, the person, and what they're auditioning for. If we're talking about college auditions, I think by and large, non-disclosure up front is where you go because you don't ever want to go into an audition with an excuse.
for sure.
Um,
You would never walk and go, "Hi, I'm Charlie. By the way, I'm autistic." You'd be like,
right.
"Oh, okay, hi."
But but there are kids who are it's very, especially like you said, when you're talking about autism, it's very evident when
Yeah,
you're talking to somebody that there's something
yep,
with the way like their eyes meet or they don't meet or
yep,
whatever. And so if I think a really good way to disclose that in a way that's not like, hello, I'm autistic, or hello, I have anxiety, is in the special skills,
yes,
being a leader in this community or
yeah,
whatever. Like, so saying, uh, I don't know, I'm a leader in the autism club or
yep,
whatever, if that's true, right?
right,
But maybe that's something you cultivate, leadership in a role that is tied to whatever your challenge is or whatever you are. Now, when it comes to like anxiety or ADHD, again, the situation depends. I
yep,
wouldn't say that in an audition. I would disclose that once we get, to the point where we're talking about accommodations and stuff.
for sure. Yeah.
Um,
How would the school help me if it's going to
right.
be?
We'd need to do that. Like, I wouldn't send any of my kids off to somewhere without the disclosure. My oldest is very, like you said earlier, like very ADHD, but actually isn't ADHD.
Uh-huh.
He has a profoundly gifted IQ, which was the
Yeah,
reason we started homeschooling in the first place. And profound giftedness is just a different animal,
yeah,
and everything is different. The way that your brain takes in information and interacts with it. And so when he would go places, like he went to a summer camp one time, we actually just said he had ADHD
Uh-huh.
because a lot of his behaviors mimic that, and they were more able to
That's my understanding.
accommodate a
Yeah.
kiddo with ADHD than someone who was gifted, because they'd be like, oh, you're just bragging now.
If I just walked in, hey, I'm Charlie. I'm profoundly gifted. People are like,
Exactly,
good for
right?
you.
And it doesn't mean anything
Yeah.
to a population who's like, okay, fine, I get that you're smart, you know? So figuring out what's going to work in a given situation that's going to get you the best support that you need. So
Yeah.
if we're taking that from an I need support in this situation,
Yeah.
then that's when you disclose. Like maybe there's you're at an audition and there's a gajillion people in the room
Yeah.
waiting, and you need to be waiting outside. That could be something where you talk to the proctor or whoever's checking you in
Yeah.
and say, I have sensory processing disorder. I
Yeah.
struggle in large groups. Is there any
Totally.
way I can wait down the hall where it's a little quieter, and you just let me know, or I can come back and check in periodically, but I just want you to know I'm here. I
Yeah.
think that's a totally appropriate way to disclose. So it's going to depend on the
I love that.
situation, what you're doing, what it's about, and
Yeah,
then how
when
you
it might
interact.
come up in a way that's evident. Like,
Yeah.
with this is a smaller example, but I know like when I have a dyslexic friends,
Hmm.
it's like you don't walk in the room and say, "Hi, I'm dyslexic."
Right.
But like if you're given a cold read, there's nothing wrong with saying, "Hey, do you mind actually if I skip a person into I need a little more time with this because
Yeah.
I'm dyslexic." Nobody looks down on that. They go, "Of course, yes. I'm not going to ask you to cold read something if that's something that's
And I
you
think
got."
that's a really good example. In fact, my younger daughter is dyslexic and did that once in, like,
Mhm.
it was a read through and she was fumbling over words and she's like, I'm sorry, I'm dyslexic. Just give me another second.
Yep.
When we can teach our kids that that's totally valid, and
Yep.
to say with no judgment, even on yourself, like, I have dyslexia, this just takes me a minute, can I just have
Yep.
another minute to reread, is empowering. And
Yes.
then you're when you say it in that way, you're inviting the person behind the table to come in with you and join you on that journey. And actually, I think that makes them more open
Yes,
to
and there's a
hearing
confidence.
you.
I love what you said. You don't walk in the room and apologize. That's right. There's a way
Mhm.
of I think there's a way of talking about those conversations where it's not an apology. It's a self-awareness that then,
Mhm.
yeah, invites them to say and also if it's two-way relationship, does invite them to go, "What? Huh?" If they were to have a negative reaction to that, I'm like, "Then that's probably not the school for you,"
Yeah.
right? Do you wanna
Right.
fool yourself into a school where you're auditioning for a program head who's like, "Oh, autism, I don't know what to do with that." And you'd be like, "Well, it's gonna be my reality for the next 4 years." Like, I
Yeah.
feel like that would be a yeah, it wouldn't be a situation where I feel like it would be helpful to not have that information out there. I just watched, for any big Survivor fans, we just watched one of the final three in this last version of Survivor was autistic.
Mhm.
Like day one, she just came in was like, I need to find an ally. I have to tell them I can't lie. I'm not going to pick up on people lying, and I may have an episode in the middle of a challenge. Like she did, and then like he was able to comfort her. It was this very kind of a little bit overly cloying moment where Jeff Probst ends up crying on Survivor, but it ends up being this like kind of beautiful thing of like hey, this is someone who was aware, and I think it was a young person who was confident to be able to say, I know how I can succeed in this game, and I need to have those things happen.
Mhm.
She ended up coming off so confident, and it ended up being an asset to her as opposed to a
Right.
negative. So, yeah, I guess we talked about accommodations a little bit. As you're looking at programs,
Mhm.
what does that look like? What are you looking for when you're having those conversations about like what additional resources or investigations of sort of faculty and which faculty might be able to work or not work with children who are neurodiverse? What could families be looking for? What questions should they ask and what should they be looking for in terms of which programs may be more supportive or less supportive of their neurodiverse kids?
Yeah, I think that more and more, the majority of the programs have accommodations and you'll find ways to work. I think that when you have a kiddo who is neurodivergent in any way, shape, or form, that's when it's super important to build in the extra time at the end of this process to be able to visit the final choices.
Hmm.
So visit the final choices in a way that allows you time to take a tour and talk to some students. That was really beneficial for us at the end there. The feeling on campus versus so many people say that and it feels so out there and like woo woo, but there really is something about stepping on campus and
Yeah.
talking to the people on campus. That I remember on one of the campuses, Molly turned to me and she's like, I didn't believe people when they said, like, when you're there, and
Hmm.
I feel like I could live for 4 years here.
Hmm.
I like the conversations that we've had and whatever. I think that's hard though, because you just really, I mean, you don't, when it comes to neurodivergency and clicking with people. There's still the element of you've got people, like, you don't know everybody that's in your cohort. So there could be, it very well could be, you get in there your first year and this is not a good fit for you because of the people who make up your cohort.
Yeah.
Most cohorts are small,
Yeah.
and you live with them and breathe with them and do all your classes with them. So holding that loosely, I think, is important too. um, Asking the questions, like, once you're accepted, asking the questions about what kind of accommodations are there for, this, that, and the other. Molly got really good about asking what mental health accommodations there
Yeah.
are, what kinds of resources they have for students who might be struggling with any kind of anxiety or challenges in that way. She asked about tutoring. Though she's very, very smart, she gets in her head about stuff, and
Mhm.
learned through going through some dual credit stuff that, like, the free tutoring on campus is actually a good thing.
Yep.
And so she asked those questions in appointments and meetings.
Yep.
And so empowering your kids, or encouraging your kids to feel empowered enough to ask those questions, especially. So I don't remember if it was you or Leo who said this in one of our parent things, but, like, the tables have turned once you're accepted academically, or once you're accepted artistically. Even if you're just accepted academically and you're still waiting on the artistic, um, when you're meeting with, like, the admissions people or the financial people or whatever, those artistic people aren't hearing about all the questions that you're asking. They're too busy. So,
They're trying to
like,
get you to sign on the dotted line. They want to book
yeah.
you.
So even if you haven't, like, if we had visited somewhere and we didn't know that we were artistically accepted, but we knew we were academically accepted,
Yep.
asking about tutoring, asking about mental
Yep.
health facilities, asking about all of that when you're not sitting with the program director is not going to damage anything. No, there's no
That's
bias
their
against that,
job.
because
Yeah.
the registration people, or the, whatever records people, they're not going to call and say, hey, did you know that the person who you're thinking about offering a BFA to has anxiety and wants to see a mental health professional? Like,
Yeah.
they're not going to do that. So
100%.
the tables really have turned at that point. You ask the questions academically and accommodation wise of the departments that are separate from artistic while you're waiting on
Yep.
the artistic stuff, because it's not crossing over. There's no
Yep.
crossover at that point. And
Yep.
then once you're accepted to both, you really do have all the power to ask any question. You're not going to have your offer rescinded
Yep.
because you have autism, or
Yep.
because you have anxiety, or you have ADHD, or whatever. They're actually going to feel better about you when you go into it, because they have information that they might need or want. And
And I think less stigma in general. So even if they
yeah,
were to, like, even if that information were to somehow cross the membrane, which it wouldn't, but if it did, it's like I do think even 15 years ago there may have been a little more stigma, but like
yeah.
now the number of schools who talk about we're looking for diversity of
Mhm.
ability, that's something we're actively seeking out, and certainly have an understanding of, oh, this doesn't make you something less. This doesn't make. I feel like there's less stigma than there would have been 15
Absolutely.
years ago.
And then, to your point before, if there is stigma, you don't want to be there anyway.
For you. You're right. And right, I shouldn't say there are no programs or no people who certainly have biases. There still are.
Mhm.
But, I think the world has evolved, the theater world
Yeah.
and
Oh,
the college.
so much, so much.
I wonder, sort of in general, like, how do you feel? I'm thinking about this a little bit as a parent. Like, how do you feel in terms of like the language? I even caught myself saying autistic students, and I think now we more likely would say, students with autism, or struggling with autism, or other people use different phrasing. How do you feel about even this? So first, that kind of language in general, and then even the idea of like labeling. Like there
Mhm.
was a I think about this as a parent. There was a Times article recently that was sort of saying like, hey, the way I now think of neurodiversity is more episodic, the way that we might view other forms of mental health. So like someone who struggles with depression isn't necessarily depressed all the time, but there's
Right.
somebody that even in their own life they'll experience various levels of depression, and that might be true for things like ADHD too, that you experience it at different levels. I guess the more that's I'm interested in that scientifically, but I'm also kind of, as a parent, like, do you ever have any fear of, like, in labeling somebody as you're an anxious kid? Is there danger in then I think of myself differently and in more of a victimhood mindset, or is it in terms of just like the experience of, does that change me being called anxious as opposed to someone who's experiencing anxiety, or that kind of thing?
Yeah. Uh, so this is, I'm not probably the most, I don't even know, like, politically correct with my verbiage.
Nor do you have to be. I'm sure most of our listeners are not the most, but yeah, yeah.
Right. So the thing is, like, as a parent, so I have this unique perspective of having the background in education and the career working with families who have kids who are differently wired in some way, shape, or form,
Yeah.
and parent 4 kids who have very different neurodivergencies, even from each other.
Right.
And I will say, first, as a professional, I don't always say it right.
Right.
Because here's the thing, I've now been doing this. I've been working online since like the dinosaur age.
Mm-hmm.
I had a blog when blogs were the popular thing, like built on Blogger. And at that time, you said it one way. And over the course of like the 13 years or whatever, that I mean, I started blogging before Instagram was created. Like
Mm-hmm.
this is a long time. And through that period of over a decade, the language has switched multiple times.
Yep.
And you can have people arguing with you online because you said he's autistic or he is a person with autism,
Mm-hmm.
both ways.
Uh-huh.
And you can have people that say you need to use person first language, or whatever first diagnosis first language. And then you have people who say you need to use the words that autistic people use. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I've got friends who are autistic who like to be told, who like to be called autistic, and I've got other
Mm-hmm.
friends who are autistic who want to be talked about as a person with autism. So
Mm-hmm.
even that doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I think that that you need to say whatever's most comfortable for you and your child and whomever has the diagnosis in your world, and
Uh-huh.
change it if you're talking to somebody else and say, I'm sorry, this is just how I've always talked about it and my child prefers to be referred to. And
Yep.
then remember that as a society, there is a danger of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. If
Yep.
we're too focused on the language, we're not helping children. They are
Mm-hmm.
children. Even our 17 and 18-year-olds, they are
Mm-hmm.
children, be able to become the best versions of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And when we are so focused on the language and not the person behind the language, we're not helping them. We're just using them as a platform to debate. And so I don't think language matters as much as the person, and getting the person the support, accommodations, and help that they need to be, like I said, the best version of themselves, because it is who they are. It
Yeah.
is part of them. And so when it comes to language, I think you use what comes naturally to you. And if someone corrects you, you say, okay, well, when I'm talking to you, I'll use that language and
Yep.
let it go at that. And
Yep.
then the other part of that conversation with regards to labels, when we're talking about kids, we need to give them all the tools that we can give them as parents, because our kids are going to label themselves if we don't. So if you're not letting them know that they're struggling with anxiety or
Uh-huh.
perfectionism, they're labeling themselves as stupid, as dumb, as bad, as broken, and
Mm-hmm.
we're not giving them the tools. We don't want them to use it as an excuse, like you said, for bad
Mm-hmm.
behavior, because we live in a society with other people, and my rights stop when somebody else's start. I can't push
Uh-huh.
you down because you're in my way. But I can say, I really need to walk over there and you're in my way. Could you please move? Like, we need to give them the language to be able to accommodate
Uh-huh.
everybody's needs while still honoring their impulsiveness. Like, I can't say I have ADHD and my impulses are hard to control, so I pushed you and I'm okay
Mm-hmm.
for that. No, you still can't push a person. So we need to help them understand that ADHD makes controlling your impulses a little bit more challenging for
Mm-hmm.
you than it is for me to control my impulses, but it doesn't make it less right. You
Yep.
still need to you still need to control your impulses. You just might need to talk to yourself a little bit before you act, and you might need to apologize more for behaviors that you do impulsively. And so giving them the language to understand that their brains are wired in a way that, manifests as anxiety or autism or ADHD or sensory processing or whatever, gives them the tools to understand what their brain is doing, but
Mm.
we want to encourage them not to use it as an excuse for bad behavior, because behavior is always a choice, even if it's a hard choice.
Oh, that's so well said. Yeah. I just feel like that's the root of, because I find myself, I have an almost 4-year-old now.
Hmm.
So I find myself resistant to what is almost certainly true of a label of my child as a highly sensitive child. That's the
Hmm.
fashion of the day, the word of the day. But it does feel like it's that accountability side of it, or it's like the person. I mean, of course she's 4, so I don't want her to have too much accountability. But it's like you want her to be able to develop of like, I don't want her to think, oh, I'm incapable of doing these other things,
Right.
even if you're aware of like, hey, it may be that you are somebody who this is harder for. It's clear that this is harder for you than other kids. But I still want you to be able to do it. I want you to be as
Yeah.
successful as you can in life and all those things that I feel my personal resistance, even though I think intellectually I'm like, of course that's true. And I don't want to not say that's true. And I don't want her to think it's because there's something wrong with her that she can't do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and that's a great conversation. Like, my gosh, your brain is wired in a way that makes you so sensitive to understand what other people are
Yeah.
feeling. You're so empathetic. You've got these big feelings. That's such a
Yep.
gift. We just need to be sure that we're not hugging people if they don't want to be hugged. We're not
Yeah. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
yelling with excitement if we're in a place where we need to be quiet. And that's going to be really hard for you, but I'll help you because
Yep.
your empathy is amazing. Like, so having that language is important and exciting without then like demonizing it, right?
Right.
Because you don't
Without,
want
like,
that to be
now
a
you're like this.
problem that they need to fix. You want it to be an understanding of who they are and what they need to work on to accommodate the others around them.
Yep. And I definitely now have more empathy for, it's just like, but she's Solvay. It's like, she's this person. She's this unique.
She's
it's nothing wrong.
adorable and she's so exuberant. I adored her.
But I do really, I mean, I see with our parents, I've seen it for years where they go, oh, but let me tell you, my child is, I'm like, I find myself doing, okay, but she is really special. Like, I don't know. I understand it well. I don't know how expert you feel here in terms of like a conversation about like neurodiversity in commercial theater. Like, I guess, how have you, is that something that you are paying attention to in terms of like, we've seen much more evident diversity of ability. That's something that's certainly on Broadway. That's both more inclusive. I think we've seen that in some ways, but also externally more sort of represented with shows like How to Dance in Ohio, et cetera. How do you feel in terms of as you're seeing the commercial theater world and how they're representing neurodiversity and or being inclusive, or are there areas where you say, hey, there still is more lacking, or places where I see this as a big miss?
Yeah. I think that I'm learning more and more as we go because of the venues, Molly's been more of a part of and the shows that we've seen and things like that and the people that we've met. I'll say like the world of professional theater is smaller than you think. And it's really exciting to have met so many people throughout this process because we're seeing all of that. So I feel like I'm getting more insight into that than I once had. And then, just being on top of like the news of the Broadway world and regional world. So I think that it is becoming more accepting and inclusive. I think that and this is completely personal with, a little bit of my professional bias in there. I think the danger is always flipping the pendulum too much to forget about, like, we want true representation. But we also want to honor the acting piece because acting is a craft and skill, and there are people who are very gifted in that craft and can portray people that they aren't in a way that people maybe who are in that particular neurodivergence may not be able to convey the emotional. It's a different thing being with a person who has any kind of neurodivergency. We can say autism, we can say ADHD, any of those things, and an actor portraying it, because an actor's job is to help you feel that character's struggle, that character's internal debate through all of the things they portray. Whereas while you can see a person who has that neurodiversity portraying it, you might not be able to feel it as an audience member who doesn't experience it in a way that an actor can convey. So I think we have to be careful in professional theater of honoring both. There are definitely actors who are on the autism spectrum who are phenomenal actors and can help you feel the true struggles of autism. But I've also seen actors in the show that I don't think it's around anymore, Atypical, that Netflix had for a while, who give a really amazing portrayal of the internal workings of autism, and they're not autistic. So I still think that we need to cast the best person for the role because acting is a craft, but
Yep.
we need to be more open to, like, we need to get more actors who have these actual diagnoses in there,
Yep.
to either portray it or to support the portrayal of it.
Yep.
So we're being extremely, extremely authentic. And I think there are some theaters and some productions who do that really, really well. And then there are some that it almost feels like they're doing it for the, well, we hired these actors, like,
Filler token.
and there's always been that, right?
Yeah,
Like
of course.
with any kind of movement.
It's impossible to draw the line, especially when we talk about lived experiences that are not evident, that are not always like, oh,
Yes.
I can tell this person is this. You talk about sexuality, you talk about it goes. It's really hard to know exactly where to draw the line of who can portray different
Hmm.
non-evident lived experiences. I always use the analogy of like, just you're playing a murderer, you don't actually have to be a murderer. There's
Right.
certain things you go, well, that's obviously true, but then there's where exactly that line is drawn. I mean, I've had multiple gay friends argue about whether all the people in inheritance have to be gay or not, and smart people who argue both ways on both sides, who say no, you cannot understand it if you're not. I don't know
Yeah.
that that's I'm set out of the debate and go, it's interesting, but
Right. I think that's where I stand too. Like, it is a really interesting debate, and I can see both sides of it. I can see a value to having a person with that lived experience, like you said, a person who is autistic portraying an autistic character. And I can see the value of having someone who is a really talented craft based actor portraying it to evoke the emotions in the audience. There's pluses and minuses to both sides of that. And so I ultimately think that the accessibility of theater is what the accessibility of the auditions,
yeah.
and the accessibility of people coming into the theater to watch is the bigger,
Yeah.
place we want to open things up.
Well said. And I know it's definitely has been and is now quite actively a goal of MTCA to keep making sure that we can be supportive to our neurodiverse
Mhm.
students. And it's something our coaches, I mean, it's one of the most requested things from our coaches when we ask, like, hey, where could we support you more? That they've all keep saying, how can you help me more with it? I want to be able to help my neurodiverse students more
Yeah.
and into this world. And so something that sort of we'll put our flag in to keep continuing to try to grow and learn in that area ourselves. But we're going deep and philosophical, and we're running long, which I knew we would. I knew this would be. I think we're going to break records for our longest podcast to break date. So we're going to do a little quick break, and then
Okay.
we're going to come back and talk about homeschooling. So back in a flash. All right, we're back with Colleen Kessler, and we're going to try to make this not another 30-minute section. We'll see how we do. But I want to talk about, you mentioned already that your decision to homeschool.
Yeah.
I want to talk about that. First, let's talk about homeschooling just in general in terms of like why you want to homeschool, what the experience what is and was of homeschooling. You talked about some of the specifics of what adjusted and balls that were dropped, et cetera. But talk to me about what made you decide, hey, I do want to homeschool my kids, and what is that experience?
Okay, so again, full transparency, I came into homeschooling kicking and screaming.
Mm-hmm.
So I taught for a decade. I taught first, third grade, and then I taught gifted and twice exceptional kids, along with their emotional needs, for second and third grade for a long, long time. I
Mm-hmm.
left teaching not to homeschool. I left teaching
Mm-hmm.
to write full time
Mm-hmm.
and to be home to take my kids off the bus and give them
Mm-hmm.
cookies and ply them with sweets and
Just
experiences.
about the way entirely, yeah.
It would have been great. It didn't work out that way. My oldest, like I said earlier, is profoundly gifted. We had him tested for all manner of things in first grade because we were trying to keep him in school. We were trying to figure out what was wrong with this kid. And just like the shoemaker's kids going shoeless, the gifted specialist kids totally got that
Mhm,
misdiagnosis because
mhm,
he was like all the kids I've ever worked with. He just talked at a higher level, understood at
mhm,
a higher level, and it was just what I was used to with kids. And so I missed the giftedness and then all of the things that went along with it. And it was clear as we went further into the diagnoses that the school system that we were in at the time was not going to be able to accommodate him
mhm,
in a way that wasn't going to continue killing his love of learning, which
mhm,
was already happening. And
mhm,
then our only other option were two different schools. One was a gifted magnet school that we could drive him to, and it was a 45-minute drive one way.
mhm.
And Molly was 3 at the time, and I had a nursing baby.
Yep, and they probably
So
wouldn't let you just drive one way.
yeah,
Right.
there's no way I could drive an hour and a half twice a day with a
Mhm.
nursing baby and a preschooler,
Oof. Yeah.
and in Ohio in the winter. So
Mhm.
that school was out. It would have been his best option of the options at the time. And then the private schools we just couldn't afford. I had just left teaching. I was freelance writing, taking assignments in between nursing sessions, and it just wasn't going to work.
Yep.
So under duress, we pulled him out in February of his first grade year and decided at the time we'd take it kid by kid, year by year.
Yep.
Molly was in a preschool at the time, and she did not go back to preschool. It was
Uh,
hard to juggle the different schedules of a
yeah.
preschooler and a toddler and then a homeschooler, and be able to offer the homeschooler all of the different things, because there's an age gap between my first and my second. So there's a
Uh-huh.
5.5 year age gap. So it was really difficult to be able to give him the experiences and the time with co-ops and outside classes and different things, and still be at preschool pickup
Yep.
and, deal with the toddler who was, in the car seat.
Mhm.
So we decided to homeschool, pulled them out, kept her home. And my second one, Molly, just thrived. Like,
Uh-huh.
she, at the time, was like, she loved her workbooks. She loved sitting down at a little desk. And
Yep.
so I was, pulling the ADHD kid and gifted kid through things, like kicking and screaming. And then she was like, can I have more? Can I have more?
Uh-huh.
And so we just kept going, kid by kid, year by year. As the kids got older, we'd offer to put them back in if they wanted to. And they didn't, because the opportunities that they had just kept growing.
Mhm.
I credit homeschooling really to Molly's growth in theater,
Mhm.
because we were able to pick shows. Northeast Ohio has a tremendous theater scene with
Mhm.
so many opportunities because of Playhouse Square and because of the Beck Center and because of Cleveland Playhouse and because of Baldwin Wallace University and their partnerships and all the community and regional theaters around us. And we were able, because she homeschooled, to pick and choose community theater all
Yep.
over within an hour and a half drive, because she could sleep in, do her schoolwork in the middle of the day, and had that flexibility. So she was doing community theater as the only kid in the cast, like Mary
Uh-huh.
Lennox. And
These are professional community theater, but not
yeah,
not not kid-based theater. Yeah.
yeah, no kid, like, she stopped doing the youth theater where you pay, and they get a
Right.
role and whatever, way early on, because she was just able to. So she did youth theater, she did community
Mhm.
theater, she did some regional theater, and then she wanted the high school experience, so she did high school theater through an all boys school that recruited girls from the
Uh-huh.
community.
I was just gonna ask you, how does that work? So you how do you apply for that? How do you audition? They recruited you? You
Yeah,
came to
you
you?
just audition. So they sent out, there's a list serve here in Ohio. It's like a seriously old fashioned list serve with like
Uh-huh.
email notifications. And I came across the opening, to audition for. I don't even remember which the first one was. And we went there. She auditioned and got a part. It was something rotten, and she got
Mhm.
B, and
Mm.
just fell in love with that community of theater and the people. But it was an all boys Catholic, like, prep school.
Uh-huh.
And so it was a completely different type of experience, but it was still high school theater. And
Yeah.
so it, got her, into, gave her some of those experiences. And she is my kid who really likes the regular milestones, but also loves the flexibility of homeschooling and being able to pick and choose what she wants to do or doesn't want to do that year and drive her own education.
Yep.
So she was able to do all the homecomings and prom and, you know, awards ceremonies and things like that. But
Uh-huh.
still,
She did prom through the Catholic school?
that one she
Through a
did it.
different school?
Her best friend goes to a school, and her best friend took, because her boyfriend's a year behind her, and so they
Uh-huh.
only do a senior prom. So her best friend took her
She's a Cougar
boyfriend,
right
and her
there.
best
There we
friend's
go.
boyfriend took her for prom.
Mhm. Cute. I love,
So,
but so I guess that's a part of what, and truly this is more out of my ignorance. I wonder if there are other families who are thinking about it going, how does that work
mhm.
socially, and how do you maintain those social connections as a
Yeah, you just
homeschooler?
you
Like,
just become more active in finding them. And here's the thing. When I started homeschooling 16 and a half years ago, almost 17 years ago, we didn't have the internet the way it is now.
yep.
The prevailing thought as to how to find other homeschoolers was go to the public library during school hours, and if there were school age children, they were likely homeschooled.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And so that's how we found our first groups. And now you can, if you put into Facebook your community or your county and the word homeschool,
Yep.
you'll find groups. And then you can, if you want to be with other homeschoolers, you can find other homeschoolers.
Yep.
And then you can go to community theater, just look for audition things. Like, there's in Facebook, I'm on 3 different Northeast Ohio auditions groups and things like that. So they're constantly posting because they want people to come audition, and you
Yep.
just try to audition for the different places that are looking for kids to audition, or just do youth theater and stick with one theater. I will say, in retrospect, that was one of Molly's complaints early on, was that we went for roles she really wanted to try or shows
Uh-huh.
she really wanted to do instead of making one theater her
Committing
home.
to, yeah.
And she knows people who are also going to be going through this process, who has a home theater and is always cast as one of the
Yeah.
supporting or the leads, whereas she's constantly, learning new people and new
Free agent.
groups.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, I think as an adult, she'll realize how beneficial that is because she's
Yes.
worked with at least 30 different directors.
No, what she experienced is much more typical of what actual actors go through. It's like
Yes,
random different new casts. Whereas it's so weird sometimes when you're like, I've been in the same youth theater, I get all the leads. I'm like, good luck out in the world. That's not,
yeah,
there's no place that's gonna be like, you get all the leads at our theater now.
exactly.
I love that. Well, the maybe just a little bit. It can be a short window into it, but like, what is the experience of you? You obviously, as an educator, it was a little easier for you. But how much expertise do you have to have as a person to do three kids? I mean, do
Okay,
you have to
so
be as good as you?
that's a huge misconception because I think actually my education degree hindered me more than it helped me.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're taught to be a teacher, you're taught to manage a group of kids. You're taught to hit certain standards by a certain time, and the kids that aren't meeting those standards are getting specialized help from resource interventionists and things like
Yep.
that. Gifted kids are being pulled out to work with the gifted specialist, and you're trying to manage like the middle.
Yep.
And when you're homeschooling, you're one on one, you're meeting the kid where they are, you're moving them
Yep.
forward, and your parent, so there's a different relationship. And almost every time we've had problems in our homeschooling, in retrospect, it's when I've tried to revert back to
Uh huh.
my education background. Like,
Uh
no,
huh.
this is what we need to learn now. And so I think it hurt me more than it helped me. That said, it did give me an understanding of what most kids are learning at a given time. So when I could get out of my own way and remember that all kids develop differently,
Uh huh.
I was okay with this kid being 2 years behind in math, but this kid being 2 years ahead in math. But the kid
Uh
that's two
huh.
years behind in math is like 3 years ahead in language arts. And
Uh huh.
the one that's 2 years ahead in math is on grade level in language arts. So
Uh huh.
I think that the best thing anybody homeschooling can do is not compare themselves with other homeschoolers in their area, because kids really do develop at a different rate, and they develop at a different rate across the board. So they're not going to be. It's really difficult for any individual to be the
Yep.
same level across the board, which is why there's always kids who are struggling in some areas in school. And then the other thing for homeschoolers to remember is everyone in the world graduates with gaps.
Uh
There's
huh.
nobody that graduates high school knowing every single thing about
Yep.
every single textbook that they've ever been presented with. They don't remember things, and one individual is going to remember some stuff and another is going to remember other stuff from the same classroom. And
Yep.
schools teach things differently, and different, courses of study and sequences. And so you don't have to teach your kids everything. You have to teach them how to find the information that they want to
Mm-hmm.
learn and be able to, frankly, I think this is the gift that homeschoolers have over traditionally schooled kids is, if you can teach your kids to know that it's okay not to know and to ask questions, they're
Mm-hmm.
going to be more confident, and the professors are actually going to like them more,
Yep.
because most kids are taught that there's a right answer and a wrong answer and that they need to know it, and they're afraid to speak up and ask for help.
Yep.
And Molly's biggest successes in her couple of dual enrollment classes have been when she's gone to the professor and said, I am just not getting this.
Mm-hmm.
Can you recommend a tutor, or can you sit with me for extra time during your office hours? And now she's going to go into college knowing that admitting to a professor she doesn't know something is actually a sign of strength and intelligence, and the
Mm-hmm.
professor's going to respect her more than if she just tries to coast or dial it in. And
Yep.
so, if you're homeschooling and you're listening, you don't have to teach them everything. You just have to teach them that they don't need to know everything, but they can find the answers to anything.
It's a real adjustment. I know for most kids coming from a more rigid high school environment to see the laxity. I mean, it's not completely lax, but it's the difference in terms of the way your college professors will interact with you versus your high school professors is significant. I mean, I just remember being like, "Oh my gosh, I can just ask for that. I need more time," and the professor's like, "Of course, yeah, get your stuff. Yeah, turn it in on Monday." I'm like, "That's an option. I didn't know that was
Yeah.
ever possible." I'd love to talk a little bit. This is one of the questions that I've gotten a lot in recent years, and I was like, I have to profess my ignorance. Like, rarely do I get a Q&A kind of question in a parent meeting where I'm like, I don't know the answer. But someone asked recently, like, as a homeschooler, how might I be viewed differently in this process by um, by the colleges. So especially like when you mentioned, hey, I've over prepared them. When you look at like Office of Admissions and
Mhm.
stuff like that. So how do you feel like, from the sense that you got, how was Molly viewed, or how are homeschoolers viewed differently from a academic transcript perspective in this
Mhm.
process?
Okay, so 5, 7 years ago is a different scenario than now. Now
Uh-huh.
you have nothing to worry about. Um, there are so many more homeschoolers than there were, and so many admissions counselors are expressing that they're
Uh-huh.
seeing exactly what you just said. The kids who are coming in from a non-rigid homeschool experience are actually more easily adapting to the college environment, and so they're able to make growth quicker
Hmm.
than kids who have never had that flexibility. So not that they're viewing them over, they're just viewing them different, and they're viewing them as equally
Yeah.
enticing. Molly was not, and she doesn't understand. And I don't think any of our kids understand how hard it is to get into colleges, just to get into colleges,
Yeah.
because they're focused on the artistic
Yeah.
piece of it. Molly applied academically to 35 schools and was accepted with honors to 35 schools.
Hmm.
And her transcript is impressive, but it's not like, she doesn't have, her roommate that she's hooked up with for Otterbein has 11 APs.
Uh-huh.
Molly has 0 APs. She has 2 dual enrollment classes. One is ASL and one
Uh-huh.
is Intro to Entrepreneurship. Like, they're not
Uh-huh.
rigorous classes, but her essay was innovative. It was about like Barbie's impact on society's view of women.
And she wrote
And
it 15,000 times, it sounds like, so that
yes,
helps.
totally. And she is articulate when she talks to you, and she's consistent with her grades,
Yeah.
and she works hard. And then her audition was strong. So, but to be academically accepted with honors and merit scholarships to every single school you apply to, when you're applying to that many, and some are really competitive. She was accepted to Emerson College, which is a competitive
Yes.
academic
Very
school
academic. Yep.
with significant merit money,
Yep.
and does not quite understand the accomplishment that is. I think homeschoolers have to worry less than they do. I
Yep.
do think you need to keep good records. They don't have to be overkill, but you do need to be able to have some kind of, like, at least general description of what the transcripted course
Yep.
is. Even if it's something you taught, there's a lot of courses on her schedule that I taught, that
Yep.
we decided we were going to do, or that I framed around stuff that we did consistently, that I'm like, the hours you spent on this is definitely a class on this.
Uh-huh.
And so creating good descriptions, creating a good philosophy of your education, being able to articulate that and explain that. I had a school description and a school philosophy section that included the reason why we started homeschooling in the first place. And so if you have the documents in place and you've kind of done that work, I wish I had it in front of me, because I tell you the different sections that I included. But again, I'm totally open. If anybody like reaches out to you and wants to know that, I
Yeah.
can send you
Please, I will.
an outline, or they can reach out to me. But just be prepared. Do your work early, because
Yep.
you're going to be caught up in their work too. So you need to, I underestimated that. I underestimated the time it would take me to pull together the transcript and the course
Hmm.
descriptions and write a letter, a counselor letter, because you
Hmm.
are the counselor, and then upload my own stuff to the Common App so that she could, pull it. So do that. You also need to make sure that they've got at least one other outside teacher that can write a letter of recommendation,
Hmm.
because like we have the issue that we had a different structure to our homeschool before the pandemic, because we were part of a co-op that had teachers we
Uh-huh.
hired to be in there, and that shut down and didn't resurrect after the pandemic.
Hmm.
So after the pandemic, we pieced together a lot more of our stuff, or did online things that she was doing asynchronously. So she didn't have the same connection with the teacher that she did prior to the pandemic. And so we had to actively cultivate relationships with like a college professor for dual enrollment
Uh-huh.
and things like that. So I would say it's not super hard. It's not hard at all to get into the schools. She got top merit at every school
Yep.
she went into. And here's a little side note, this might change next year, but she went into every school test optional. She is
Mm-hmm.
a really good academic student, and she's not a great test taker because of her anxiety. And we made the conscious decision that she did not have to test, and that
Uh-huh.
any school that required a test, she just wouldn't apply to.
Uh-huh.
And it really only affected two of the schools that she wanted to go into. Um, but nationally, your diploma is recognized
Yep.
because homeschooling is legal in all 50 states.
Yep.
Every state has a different requirement. And there were some states that were like, well, she needs a GED because like New York State says this in our language and Ohio says this in our language. But then if you go back and you say, yeah, but this is our legal language and we followed
Mm-hmm.
our law to the letter, then the New York school would be like, okay, actually, you're right. So submit
Uh-huh.
what you have. So you just might have to stand strong and say, no, this is a legal diploma and this is why. And I can give you more information about the classes if you want to. But
Yep.
it is recognized in every state. And there is none of the schools turned her down because she was a
Yep.
homeschooler.
Yep. No, that certainly that's really gratifying. I think that's the part of the answer that I did know, that I know people have done it. I think it's just the how to do it, and it sounds like what I'm hearing is that it does require a certain level of organization on
Yes.
your end. That somebody at home has to be pretty organized,
Yeah.
who's doing the homeschool, even if not an expert educator. Someone's got to be able to go, I'm at least a really good, you know, organizer of things, of an event manager or whatever the thing is. They're going, I'm able to sort of process this and keep records and all that.
Yeah, or you
Um,
have to have templates like that. That's one thing I'm thinking about transferring mine into templates that somebody can download because
Now can it all be AI? Can't it just say, "Hey, write me a homeschool letter from
you
blah blah blah,
you
ChatGPT?"
absolutely can. AI is great, and then you go back and you make it more yours. I am a huge proponent of AI because it's not going anywhere. You just have to use it the right way.
That's the truth. What about this kind of tying together both
Mhm.
homeschooling and the neurodiversity question? How do you feel like the preparation for college is different? You kind of mentioned, well, when I'm not there, you know, the experience. It sounds like Molly's already had some college
Mhm.
experiences from homeschooling, but you know, what are the differences in terms of how you might be preparing her or your other children for college
Mhm.
that may be a little different than people who go into high school?
That's actually one of the main reasons that I had her take two dual enrollment classes. It was twofold. One, to show a college admissions representative that she can get an A from someone other than me,
Mm-hmm.
and at a collegiate level, and which is why I didn't care what classes she took. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
ASL is a rigorous class, and she needs a foreign language, so that one worked
Mm-hmm.
out. But Intro to Entrepreneurship, like, it was an easy class, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
But that was one piece, so she could know that the lessons that we learned that she learned in that, like, your professors have office hours for a reason. The tutoring center is free for a reason. There are
Mm-hmm.
student services because they actually want you to be successful, and they don't look down on people who utilize those services. So that was a choice we made specifically. And Ohio has a partially funded program. So we applied for it and got some credits. Even if your state doesn't, I would say it's well worth the money to even take one class at a community college, just so, even if it's just online, just so your kiddos know kind of the Blackboard was a different, like submitting assignments virtually like that. And then the other part is giving them more and more opportunities to do things that they're going to need to do. Budget, buy their own food, think through like what foods they need and why, like the meal plan. Um, they're make meals on their own. We've been practicing with like rice cooker meals.
Mm-hmm.
Figuring out ways to say no too. Like, you can blow through your money pretty quickly if you're going out with friends every day and every night. So figuring out ways like, okay, I can go out, but I'm only going to get a salad today. I'm going to eat before I go, so I'm not really hungry when I go out because I've got this food in my room.
Mm-hmm.
So I can still enjoy being with my friends, but I'm not going to like blow my budget in a week. Um, but then really knowing how to advocate for yourself when it comes to any accommodations that you need.
Yeah.
Molly has asthma, and she's going to a place where dorms don't have central air.
Uh-huh.
And when it's very humid or the allergens and pollen are really up, she really needs that cold controlled air to be able to maintain her levels. And I said, you have to appeal to the accommodations department,
Mm-hmm.
because we also had heard that that's a regular accommodation that they make. You have to bring your own window unit, but you have to have
Mm-hmm.
a physician sign it. So she made her appointment with her asthma doctor, and we went in and got a full checkup and got a new nebulizer. So she has her own nebulizer in case of emergency. She's going to teach her roommate how to use it. And she got the accommodation form for an air conditioning unit. So she's bringing that. So like knowing what happens if you have an anxiety attack and mom's not downstairs, like what are we going to do? Are you going to feel comfortable going to campus services? And, how are you going to tell your roommate to help you through things? And so, just talking through things. So a psychologist calls those social stories, and it's really just putting yourself in the social situation that you're going to potentially be in and talking through scenarios like role playing and having those, just normalizing those conversations like, hey, how are you feeling today? You're feeling good? Great. I'm feeling blah, blah, blah. The more you do it as a parent, I'm feeling overwhelmed today. I'm stressed. I haven't had a chance to work on my business this whole week and I feel like I'm failing. Can you make dinner for me tonight while I go and get an hour of work in? Showing your kids through your actions that everybody needs accommodations sometimes. So I've started normalizing doing that with all of my kids, but really intentionally with Molly this year.
I love it. All right, we've done it. We've broken the podcast record for the longest podcast yet. No, it's fantastic. I just thought let's wrap with, we often ask about like general parenting advice for parents. I feel like we've given so much of that.
Yeah.
So if there's any additional parent advice, I would take it. But I'd love to do is there any anything that you feel like from the student perspective, for our student listeners who've made it this far, any perspective of like what Molly did well in navigating her relationship with you, or anything that you sort of feel like, hey, if you could give Molly notes or give the kids like, hey, here's a way that you can have your parent most effectively help you. Anything from that end where you go, hey, this is what worked or what could have worked a little bit better from the student to parent relationship perspective?
Yeah. I think we did a pretty good job overall because we really listened to a lot of what you guys said up front. And, Leo's example of his water bottle that he shares with everybody, like that hit home in the mock auditions. And so we went into it really intentionally trying to be aware of our, open communication. That said, emotions are high. And there are times when I would try to help too much to de-escalate. And she just really needed to live in her emotions for a little bit longer. Pretty early in, we found, and it's going to be different for everybody. You have the post-audition treats and all of that. But Molly enjoyed checking out all the hotel gyms and just walking on the treadmill just to like kind of dissociate. And she did not want me to be a part of that. And so I would listen to my audiobook in the room, or I'd, go down to the lobby and she'd go in the gym. Now, sometimes she was there much longer than I was comfortable with because you never know who's walking halls and seeing a cute girl in workout gear. And so I would text. I'm like, my only requirement is you check in, or if I text you, you just say I'm still okay. And so we did that, and I gave her the space she needed. I gave her the space to FaceTime her boyfriend every night without me in the same room, so she could. So know your kid. I tell the people that I work with this, be a student of your child, really know who they are and what they need, and honor that. Sometimes as a parent, like you don't need the same things that they need, and you want to give them what you need. But if you're really intentional about knowing your kid and what they need and honoring that, everything else will fall into space or into place. It's just like when we were in that situation, we had a really rough audition, and she just wanted to stay in the room and continue her meltdown. And I said, green room's open for 20 more minutes. We should just go. And she's like, I don't want to go in the green room. I don't want to be upset in the green room. I'm like, you're not going to be the first one to be upset or cry in the green room. But if you just go get a bottle, we could walk in, you can grab a bottle of water and we could walk out if you're not feeling it. But I just don't think it's the right choice to stay here. And she's like, and I just let that percolate. And she came back out, had sweats thrown on. And she's like, okay, let's go. We went up there. We walked in. I talked to you. She went straight to the water bottles. Lacey was in a conversation with somebody else. And then you went over to her and I just went to the other side of the room. And on the way back, she said, I'm so glad you made me go to the room. So sometimes you need to push, but you need to know when to push, and you need to push less than you think you should.
Mm.
But then when you really feel in your gut that they're making the wrong decision, that's the time to push and enlist the help of the coaches. I'm telling you, we couldn't afford to do as much coaching as I wanted to do. The coaching
Mhm.
that we did was all valuable, but there is nothing that can replace the green rooms at Unifieds. That was,
I
I would have paid a significant amount more for that because
That
just
one was free. That's the part, it was free.
I know because but there's so much value. Like honestly, Charlie, I want to say that's one of the things that sold us on MTCA was
Mhm.
having that as a perk,
Of
no
course.
matter how many sessions we were able to afford. And I think because of it, we did more
Yeah.
sessions than we initially had budgeted for because there was so much value in everything that you keep wanting to give back and you keep wanting to do more. So there's so much value in that, but parents, you really do need to listen to your kids. And
That
kids, you need to know that your parents are there because they love you,
Mhm.
and anything they're saying is out of love. And so get frustrated, but then go back and say, I know you were just trying to help. I'm sorry that I lashed out. And parents do the same thing. Apologies both ways just work to repair relationships forever.
Yeah. I will let you end it on a compliment for our green room. That's very sweet. And boy, isn't it true, the idea of like we try to give our kids what we wanted. I mean, certainly as I do my therapy with my parents, I'm like, oh, I see. This is what you needed from you. This is why you gave me this, and I'm sure I'm passing that same foible along. We're trying not to, but we'll see. Colleen,
Absolutely.
thank you so much for all
Sure.
the time today. We know we can check out Raising Lifelong
Yep.
Learners on Instagram. It's at Colleen Kessler. Um, we so deeply appreciate you, and we'll send some people your way if they have specific questions about either of these topics for sure.
Yeah, no problem. And then you guys feel free to pick my brain too anytime you have somebody who comes to you needing
I will.
anything.
We will.
So
Appreciate it. Thanks, Colleen.
this is fun. I'll talk to you soon.
Wow, wow, wow. I hope you enjoyed that record breaking interview episode for us. I warned Colleen when I prepped this pod that I was like, I have 3 full episodes for you. So it turned out to be almost exactly true. This is almost the length of 3 full episodes of what we got into. Just because we're already at that record time wise, I'm going to try to keep these takeaways a little bit on the shorter side. On both of these broader topics, when we talk about neurodiversity or homeschooling, these are ones where I'd call myself more of an interested learner than someone who has any kind of real expertise on them. As far as the homeschooling, I have no personal connection there, but I do tend to think that the representation Colleen made, that squares pretty well with my general understanding of it from previous students that we've had who've done homeschooling. The basic idea that anybody can do it when you talk about like from an educational background perspective, meaning you don't have to already be a teacher necessarily to potentially do homeschooling, but that it is a big lift and it's going to take at least one very organized person in the household. Hopefully, you got the sense from the interview of like, you got to be pretty organized to pull this off. So, just knowing yourself and what you're in for before you take that on, I think is really smart. As far as potential advantages or any disadvantage of it, I know some people really swear by it, but I don't really have any expertise in terms of academically. If there's a devil's advocate position to take, Colleen had this very successful experience she told you about. If there's a devil advocate position to take, I wouldn't be the one to take it. From an artistic perspective, I can definitely say it's not going to hurt you and it's not going to help you in terms of how they view you in the room. And from that educational development perspective, which might be relevant to a lot of you, I would just leave that to people who know what they're talking about because I don't really know in terms of what is better. It was interesting to me as someone who almost certainly is going to have a gifted learner. My ears perked up. I was told my wife, I was like, we should think about maybe thinking about it. But I don't really have any expertise to share there. With neurodiversity, I think I am really learning more and more about it. It's something that I think is impacting my life more and more in terms of the presence of my family. My younger brother now identifies as someone who's on the spectrum, though he didn't identify as that growing up. So it's a bit of an adjustment for all of us as a family and understanding him, understanding ourselves a little bit better, where we might fall on that spectrum. But I can't say I have anything really helpful to add to that general conversation. I do feel relatively strongly. I'm kind of going to restate the opinion that I said on an earlier podcast, I think as part of an intro. I've previously shared that idea of like, why you might want to be comfortable disclosing potential neurodiversity in the room. But I have to say also, I do really agree almost 100% with Colleen's answer that she gave in the show about how it would vary based on different situations and be totally different for each specific person each specific diagnosis, but also each specific person with that diagnosis. Even that example I gave, anytime I give a cavalier example, I'm always like, I don't know, not 100% true. I gave that example of like, you'd never walk in and be like, hi, I'm Charlie, and this is what's going on for me, right? That's not 100% true. Depending on what was going on for you physically, or if there was some neurodiversity in some kind of evident form, I could actually see exactly that happening. If I came in on crutches because I just had a skiing accident, I could absolutely come out with a joke to just address the elephant in the room of my crutches, right? That might be a really disarming way to sort of lighten up the room or explain what's going on, especially if it fit in with who I was as a person. Wouldn't mean I necessarily have to make a joke if that's not who I am, but that would potentially be an avenue. So really, there are no hard and fast rules with any of this stuff. My strong opinion that I shared, it's not about what you have to do in the room, but it's more just kind of triggered by seeing families and students who might think or might have expressed that it's something they need to actively hide, as if there's some reason to be ashamed of neurodivergence, or really of difference in ability, physical, neurological, across the board, right? And that, especially for this process, I just think like all of the things that make you uniquely you are there to be proudly showcased rather than covered up. And in the case of something like autism, which is where we often get this question, I just don't think it's a helpful mindset for it to be viewed as a weakness to be hidden from auditors instead of a unique strength that makes you who you are, right? I made that comment about the recent Survivor player. She kept making jokes about how she was going to like unleash her autism on people. And she really figured out how to turn her autism into a strength for her that she could own. And it was a significant part of her game and her success in the game. It's Eva Erickson, if you want to look up who that person is. Eva Erickson is the person who just on this most recent version of Survivor, a very, very impressive young woman. And I do think it's not that it's important that you necessarily explicitly lead with every version of neurodivergence, including necessarily autism, right? There's so many different ways that could show up. And again, all the situations could be different, where it's like some examples we've given, like dyslexia or dyscalculia, right? They're not likely going to be relevant in most audition rooms, unless, again, you maybe you're asked to read sides in the case of the dyslexia. But I do think in general, it's important that students find a way to just comfortably and confidently own who they are in all aspects of what that means. So I just tend to be in favor of whatever makes a student confidently step into owning who they are, that's a win, right? Have you all seen or heard The Greatest Showman? If not, you have a little bit of homework to go look up on YouTube or Spotify or whatever. There's this great song called This Is Me from The Greatest Showman, which probably almost all of you know, right? I just feel like it sums up the college audition process so perfectly. You could turn almost any of the lyrics of that song into a mantra for yourself right before you walk into an audition room. Like they have the line, I am brave, I am bruised, I am who I'm meant to be. This is me. I'm not scared to be seen. I make no apologies. This is me, right? You could do that almost any of the lines. They're just like they're there. But so I think we have to find that version of I'm not scared to be seen. I make no apologies. That doesn't necessarily mean disclosure. Of course, you could be someone who makes the choice not to do that, right? But you still have to be not scared to be seen, and you still have to make no apologies for who you are as you walk into the room, just as an auditioner in general. Okay, but I don't have time to do a deep Greatest Showman deep dive. I'm not like a huge fan of the movie. I just think that song is very great for this college audition process. The last little takeaway I had was just a little note on the idea of the perfect being the enemy of the good. I really appreciated Colleen's general perspective on it, especially as a parent of a perfectionist, which I think so many of our students struggle with some element of that idea of perfectionism. I'm sure the internet and social media has made that worse. I just wanted to add in that caveat that like that 80% number that I threw out there, that is probably a bit more appropriate when we're talking about like a late night self-tape for a random guest star on a TV show. But I wouldn't necessarily use that 80% number as a barometer for a pre-screen, right? In the case of Colleen's kid, she was saying, well, maybe 80% is actually like 95%. I'm like, okay, well, that might be close enough, right? Those pre-screens, though, we've talked about it many times, they are important. They are really a big cut, as we talked about on a lot of the college episodes. A lot of the most competitive schools will pass only 25% of those videos. Some schools more, but some as few as 25% of the people are going to pass from the pre-screen. And then we also talked about others where they'll come back and view them at the end as a final tiebreaker. So they may see them, see your audition, and then watch them as the last thing as they're putting together that yes pile. So I certainly wouldn't just be like, oh, as long as they're 80% as good as you can do and focus on the 80% in terms of number. That's not at all what I mean. But that said, the idea there of like the goal is not perfection is absolutely true, right? It's not that they need or that they want to be shellacked or polished or perfect, right? In fact, we talked about this before on the pod too. Like, the goal of striving for true perfection, if perfection means like a version that's error free, it actually can take some of the human experience and freedom out of it, right? If it feels like you've drilled it 15 times that day, it might not be the take that has your all of your humanity and artistry and messiness, all of which is good. Then again, we don't want to be singing wrong notes in your song. So there's a little bit of a balance with that, right? This is where I think if you can take the part of Colleen's advice where she talks about using a professional opinion like MTCA, who does have expertise on what is representative of your child's best work. It's a word I like to use. Is it representative of your child's best work? Doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be amazing, doesn't have to be the greatest thing that's ever been sung or the greatest thing that's ever been acted, but it's got to be a representation of your child's best work. I think using that outside eye, that's money well spent. We mentioned a bit of this at the very top of the interview. Some of the point I was making in that Colleen was not like an overly involved MTCA parent, meaning she was not someone who's like present at every MTCA event and doing 100 hours of coaching with us, where some families would do a lot of coaching. Colleen they used their time really wisely and judiciously in how they engaged with MTCA, because I think they were on a budget, right? You talked about some of that budget and from a scholarship perspective and what that would mean. And part of what they did, which I think was really smart, is they engage in what we call our red light, green light system. This is how we help you with pre-screens. And are we ready to film? Are we ready to send them in? So you'll first get hey, your coaches think you're in a good place to go ahead and film. And then we think you're in a good place to actually send those videos in once we've seen those videos, right? It is just a place where I think families benefit a lot from having that outside expert eye, especially for those perfectionists who, by their own standards, might always see what's wrong. It's nice for them to be able to have someone look at their pre-screen videos and say, let me focus on what's right here. There's a lot right here, and this is absolutely representative of your best work. Or if something isn't ready, to let them know that, right? Once you've heard someone say, I think you can do better, this is not representative of your best work, then it can really put your mind at ease when someone says, okay, now that is absolutely representative of your best work. That can make you go, okay, this person was honest with me, and now they're saying a yes, and now I feel good about having that yes as well. Ultimately, it's always going to be your decision as a student and as a family, but to have that outside eye to help you if you're not sure, I think it'd be really helpful for people. All right, that is a good place to leave it for another episode of Mapping the College Audition, produced by Meghan Cordier and Kelly Prendergast, with social media work by Jordan Rice. You can check us out at Mapping the College Audition on Instagram, as well as like, subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you listen or watch your podcasts. And as always, check us out at MTCA.com for help with your individual college prep journey and a bit of that outside eye expertise that we can offer you. To my young artists out there mapping their journeys, please trust that you are enough exactly as you are right now, all diversities of ability included. And now keep striving. We'll catch you next week.